Melody, if we got, let me know when we have quorum, okay?
I'll just do a quick check.
Okay. It looks like it, but
Mhm. You do.
okay, thanks. And I see that Murray's ready to go and he's our next speaker and it's 1 o'clock. Go ahead, Murray. You have 5 minutes this time round. I see you're up at least 3 times.
So just on a procedural matter, Madam Chair, this is the submission where I am representing 4 separate landowners. I could have registered separately for each of the 4 landowners and chose not to do that because I don't need or want 20 minutes of the committee's time, but I'd appreciate it very much if I could have 10 minutes to make my presentation.
See,
Chair
why
Murray, if I
you're
may.
tricking me, Murray, because I have you in your number 19 spot as doing that. So we'll move the number 19 to number 13. And we'll move
I'm happy to
Len.
do number 19 first, if that's what you'd like to do.
No, let's stick with the one that we had. So Murray Chown on Len Payne. And then we have you 3 from now, and then we have you at number 19 with the 4. Okay?
So I'll start with Len Payne and it'll just be
Yes,
5
please.
minutes.
That's right. And then we'll go to the next speaker.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So if I may, members of the Joint Committee, this submission is specifically related to the notion of a gold belt that is being presented by staff in this report. I certainly fully expect this committee to support the notion of a gold belt, and that council will direct staff to go back to the drawing table and develop policies related to the notion of a gold belt. It's my understanding that the sole purpose of the gold belt is to draw a line in the sand between future urban expansion areas and the rural area to the end of this century. My concern is that the description of the gold belt in the staff report, and specifically on page 43, sets out what that gold belt would be, and I certainly have issues with that. The paragraph states that within the gold belt, the intent of the policies will be to sustain or enhance agricultural operations on a variety of scales, enhance green space networks, and then it goes on to say prohibit further development except for agricultural severances and mineral aggregate extraction, and encourage social, environmental, and cultural uses in the same way as in the inner greenbelt does. That statement, Madam Chair, members of the committee, doesn't reflect the reality of the existing and underlying designations in the area being proposed for the gold belt. It at least acknowledges that we can establish and expand pits and quarries, but there's no recognition of the rights to develop grandfathered country lot subdivisions within the gold belt. There's no recognition of the ability to develop designated rural employment areas that fall within the proposed gold belt, and that eliminates or purports to eliminate opportunities to expand or designate rural employment areas where the need has been identified. So there's a clear conflict between this statement in the report and what I understand to be the intent. It's not my understanding that the gold belt is intended to prohibit those other forms of rural development from taking place as presently permitted in the official plan, and would be permitted under some of the policies that are set out in your draft official plan. I raise that for the committee's consideration and look forward to a staff response. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Murray. And we do have Councillor Moffat has a question for you. Councillor Moffat.
Thanks. Just a point to just address what I think your interpretation of the gold belt is absolutely accurate. It is designed to act as a border to say, if we need to grow over the next 80 years, we don't need to grow into these lands. It is not a new policy that would then say we're changing the designation of these lands or adding further restriction to these lands in particular. There, no intention to bring forward a policy piece that changes anything with regard to those lands that are within that gold belt. Certainly, I think as a part of the final official plan that comes forward in the fall, make sure that we have that clarity out there so that residents and yourself and clients that you might have will certainly get that clarity they're looking for. Because I know we've had a lot of conversations about stuff like this, about agricultural protection. It comes up a lot in emails with landowners and various folks that are going to probably speak here today. But certainly there's no intent here to create a new policy, a new restrictive policy on rural lands within this area. It's really just meant to say we can grow in the future, but we don't have to grow onto the lands that we've identified as aggregates or agricultural or rural natural features.
Was there any
Thank you for
question
that,
there?
Counselor. It's not what the report says, but thank you for that.
Okay, Counselor Dudas has a question.
Thank you. It's just more a point that I wanted to make, in that there was some ambiguity with the report and what the gold belt is intended to do, what it means, how prescriptive it is, and just the fact that the duration of the 79 years, how will that, if it does at all, tie the hands of future councils, future residents, developments, infrastructure. So I do have a direction that is coming forward. I've worked very closely with Steve Willis and his amazing team to really bring those details forward when they come back with the official plan report. And I believe that's coming forward in June. I could be corrected on that. So, there was some differences of opinion when we read the report in respect to that. I believe that will be addressed with this direction, and that those clarity and the intent of this gold belt will be clearly defined. So I just wanted to state that.
Thanks
So
again.
So not a.
Chair, you're on mute.
Thank you, Marie. We'll see you shortly. Melanie,
you.
I'm sorry, next up is Stephanie Morris, Senior Land Use Planner. Stephanie, are you here? There you are. I saw you earlier this morning, so thank you for coming out. You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Morris, and as the chair indicated, I'm a Senior Land Use Planner with the Department of National Defense. D&D has reviewed the growth management report, and we support the recommendation to exclude the lands municipally known as 1225 March Valley Road from the urban boundary. These lands are within the South March area that was discussed this morning. What we're concerned about is the compatibility of residential land uses in such close proximity to the Connaught Range and Primary Training Center. Connaught's been in operation since 1921, and it will continue to be an important training asset within D&D's portfolio. It possesses infrastructure that is unique to the D&D portfolio, including the only 1,000 meter range in Canada. So should residential development be permitted adjacent to Connaught, residents could expect disruptive, impulsive noise generated by a wide range of noise generating weaponry, ranging from target pistols to sniper rifles, some applications of general purpose machine guns, grenades, and explosive ordnance disposal. In particular, the grenade and EOD, or explosive ordnance disposal ranges, are located in close proximity to the lands in question, being just 400 meters away. Noise activities may occur simultaneously and are generally permitted to occur between 7:30 a.m. and 11 p.m. However, activities can proceed further into the nighttime hours if prior D&D permission is provided. The development of these lands was previously considered in an Ontario Municipal Board hearing of OPA 76. The board accepted the evidence provided by the city acoustic engineer that noise levels are significant and will substantially exceed provincial guidelines in a manner that would be difficult or even impossible to mitigate. So the type of noise must also be considered. This isn't background highway hum, it's firearms and explosives, which can be particularly aggravating for a resident if residences are located within noise impact areas. A noise study was recently submitted by the landowner, but it has only just recently been received by D&D, and that didn't leave sufficient time for a qualified acoustical expert to review the report. But I do know that the report offers a different conclusion than what was accepted by the board in the appeal of OPA 76, and appears to rely on class 4 criteria, which, based on my understanding, has not been approved by council for the lands. In addition to the noise concerns, D&D also has traffic and overlap concerns. However, the strength of the noise concerns and potential impacts to residents must be considered by the committee if there is any intent to further consider residential development of these lands, particularly given that there are other more viable areas which can accommodate the growth requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have a question.
We have a question from Chair El Shantiri.
You're on mute, Chair.
Okay, yeah, there you go.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Stephanie, for your presentation. I thought the DNT, they don't use that area for explosion anymore. They're using, I don't want to use where, but some, abandoned quarries in my ward. And to my knowledge, we always authorize them to use it in those areas because we want to avoid those loud explosions from Carlin. And I hear you say now you use that. So which one is it? Because I thought all along you are using our quarries in the rural area.
We do have a license range for grenades and explosive ordnance disposal 400 meters from the site in question.
And you still use those grenades as we speak now in those areas, or you take them to the quarries?
We do use that area.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie. I don't see any other questions, so thanks for coming out today. Our next speaker is Alex Cullen, President of the Federation of Citizens Associations. Alex? Is he here?
I don't see him.
Just checking for him. Not seeing him at the moment.
Okay.
No, he showed up.
Oh, there he is. What is that in the background? Are you out in Lake Louise or something, Alex?
No,
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Alex.
You are on mute. There you go.
The background is British Columbia. Is from a canoe trip I did with my son a few years ago.
That looks lovely.
Yes, except you can't swim in the water. It's too cold. It's all glacial fed. So, but we'll talk later about that. So folks, thank you for having me. My name is Alex Cullen. I'm here representing the Federation of Citizens Associations to speak to the staff report on lands being proposed for residential and industrial urban expansion. You may recall last May, the FCA spoke at City Planning Committee in opposition to the proposed expansion of the city's urban boundary. We were and are prepared to accept more intensification as a means of accommodating the future growth of our city. We opposed expansion of the city's urban boundary as the alternative based on our concerns over the cost of urban sprawl and the negative impact this would have on our environment, both natural and urban. I think many of you were surprised at the time at the FCA's position supporting intensification. The fact of the matter is that our member associations recognize that there is good intensification and there is bad intensification. Much of our city has grown over the years through intensification, and good intensification can occur without causing a ripple. This is the intensification that fits within the fabric of existing communities and has been occurring for decades. All you have to do is look around you. Whereas it is bad intensification that grabs all the headlines, is objected to by community groups, and appears to set the narrative that communities oppose intensification. This is unfair and misleading. Not all intensification is bad or is opposed by community groups, and not all community groups are wrong to oppose bad intensification. However, last May, Ottawa City Council adopted a hybrid approach to accommodating future growth in the city in part based on intensification and in part permitting an expansion of the urban boundary by 1,300 hectares, and directed staff to identify candidate locations for this expansion. The report is before you today. I'm here on behalf of the FCA to tell you three things. One, that the FCA reaffirms its opposition to urban sprawl. It's costly to taxpayers, bad for both the built and natural environment. We think the decision to add 1,300 hectares to the city's urban area is and was wrong. Two, the FCA supports the proposal of a gold belt or outer green belt in this report, involving the protection of agricultural resource lands, aggregate resource lands, and natural areas from future urban development. Three, as for the remaining 270 hectares of unassigned land for urban expansion, the FCA is concerned about the implications of establishing a new urban center in the Leitrim East, Carlsberg West area. That's option 3. As there is no infrastructure to accommodate a new committee the size of Bell's Corners there. The cost of providing servicing, roads, and rapid transit, particularly LRT, will not be fully covered by development charges, as you know, and will have detrimental effects as more cars will have to travel greater distances to get to employment, shopping, cultural, and community amenities in our city. Thank you for providing the time to me to speak on behalf of the FCA.
Thanks very much, Alex. I don't see anyone with their hands up, so thank you for coming out today. And happy birthday, by the way, not to yourself. I know. Hey, it's getting close though, Alex. February.
Yes, I know. Next month.
It's a big one, 70 for us. See, I have a very good memory, Alex.
And,
Anyway, thank you for coming out. And guess what? The next speaker is Murray Chown. Murray, this time just to remind you, you're speaking on the Carp Road land owners south of 417 and east of Carp Road.
Thank you for the reminder, Madam Chair, and I will limit my comments to 5 minutes. I'm hoping that the members of the Joint Committee have had the opportunity to read our written submission that was circulated on Friday under cover of an email from my colleague, Adam Thompson. And Melody, thank you for putting that up, and if you could leave it up for the course of my presentation, I'd appreciate it. Members of the committee, I want to draw your attention to a statement on page 57 of the staff report where it states, the existing supply of 382 net hectares, and this is of industrial related land, is within the range of 363 to 507 net hectares to accommodate the anticipated industrial related growth to 2046. So staff are advising you that the current land supply falls within the range of what they project to be required. Adding more land obviously improves the supply, but it's not critical to the supply of employment lands in the city of Ottawa. Staff are recommending the addition of a large tract of land south of the 417 and east of Carp Road to the urban area. They're also recommending that all of that land be designated for traditional industrial freight and storage uses. Now, a portion of this land is impacted by the existing quarry and landfill site along on the north side of Highway 417, and that's illustrated by the red line on this image that's before you today. Everything north of that land is subject to the influence area of those two land uses and logically are not suitable for residential development. But the land south of that line is suitable for residential development. And rather than searching far and wide for more residential land to meet the requirement identified in the growth management study in May of 2020, there's almost 30 hectares of land available here, serviceable, accessible for residential purposes. These lands would be accessed from Carp Road at the intersection of Westbrook Road. You can see illustrated here that road coming east from Carp Road. That road would provide access both to the industrial lands to the north and the residential lands to the south. We would urge committee to direct staff to reconsider these lands for residential purposes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. I'm just going to check and see if I've got anybody waving at you. No, I don't. Thanks for coming out. We'll see you shortly.
Thank you.
Dr. Judy Macon
Yes.
is up next regarding the South March new community. Are you here? There she is.
Ah, here she is.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to participate. I am Judy Macon. I'm speaking today as a private citizen and as a resident of Ward 5, West Carleton March, where I've lived for the past 29 years. I've served on several community associations. I've worked with Eli and Marianne Wilkinson and Murray Chown on the Public Advisory Committee to develop the CDP for the Canada North Urban Expansion development, where I learned more than I ever wanted to know about planning an urban expansion. First, with regard to this report that you have before you, I want to start by commending staff for the Gold Belt proposal. I believe this is an excellent recommendation. It's most welcome, and one word, hallelujah, enough said. I want to spend my time speaking today about the proposed Category 1 and Category 2 urban expansion lands. And they're on the map that Melody has put up before you there. The Category 1 lands are in yellow on this map, and they're along both sides of March Road and west to Old Second Line. The majority of this land is already developed into 5 rural estate subdivisions with a total of 150 homes on large lots. There's also St. Isidore's Church and the cemetery, a Catholic elementary school, and several active farms. There's very little vacant land here to develop. Any development applications for this area would have to be dealt with in a piecemeal process that would not result in a complete community, and therefore would not be good planning. So why include it? The only benefit I can see is that it would provide a gateway of servicing for the Category 3 lands described as one of the potential new communities in South March. This Category 3 land is in blue on the map before you. Category 1 plus Category 3 combined, if they were both approved, would ultimately result in a massive new urban community that would further increase the size by 300% of the already approved Canada North Urban Expansion. That CDP is approved for 3,000 homes serving 8,000 people. This would triple that. I believe these Category 3 lands should not be studied any further. And the Document 3 report that you have provides you with at least 5 reasons to exclude them. They're not contiguous with each other. You can see there's 2 separated parcels south on Old Second Line Road. Although they're not zoned agricultural, much of this vacant land is being actively farmed. So make no mistake, these are in fact agricultural lands. They're being farmed for hay crops, field crops, and raising animals. A quick Google search that you can do will, if you look for Marchhurst Road and Old Second Line Road, will confirm this for you. My farming friends also tell me it's not marginal farmland, but it's rich clay loam. The reason the land is zoned general rural instead of agriculture is that the municipality of Canada zoned all the rural lands that way 30 years ago during the high-tech boom. If these lands had been evaluated as agricultural more recently, they would have been included in the Gold Belt. Third reason, they're adjacent to the Carp Hills natural area and the South March Highlands natural area, both of which are prime wilderness and wetland areas, providing important wildlife habitat. Fourth reason, they are 2 significant steps removed from being contiguous with current urban services and transit. First of all, the urban Canada North urban area has to be developed. And the cost of infrastructure servicing, as Don Herwire told you this morning, is high. Fifth reason, this expansion is really not needed. The 180 hectares that was added by the OMB into the urban boundary in 2012, that was called Area 1, Canada North Urban Expansion. It's marked as existing urban area on the map there at about 3 o'clock. It's now a planned urban community with its own CDP. What was Area 2, Richcraft's development off Terry Fox Road in Huntmar, is also already draft approved. But think about this. Not one house has been built in either location in 10 years. This clearly proves there's no demand for this growth in the South March, Canada North area. I finally just have to tell you that South March has taken one for the team time after time. We've witnessed the sprawl of Canada's North growth into Class 1 farmland, beautiful acres for decades. It's time to say no to further growth in South March.
Thank you very much, Judy, and not just for today, but for always been available and working with us on the neighborhood, 15-minute neighborhood walk in the village of Carr. But if you can put the map back on, if you don't mind, so that area in blue, Judy, if the one you make reference to, I can assure you, if that to happen, that means all the land beyond this, all the way to Woodlawn, is a general rural. So that means you will create larger than the city of Canada in that area if that to happen, because the rest of the land beyond the blue map you have all the way to Woodlawn, like all the way up, like to the northwest or west north, beyond Murphy Side Road. That's all general rural. So I'm glad you brought attention to this area, and also the former city of Canada zoning all that land as a general. Thank you, Judy, for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
We have again.
Paul Johannes. Paul Johannes is up next.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members for having me this afternoon. So my name is Paul Johannes. I'm here today on behalf of the Green Space Alliance of Canada's capital. I'm working collaboratively with many other organizations on the People's Official Plan for a Climate Emergency. And we're be addressing the certain points in the staff report regarding the selection of the urban expansion lands. First, we see the value in having a gold belt being proposed with the intent to contain future urban expansion in the city of Ottawa until the end of the century. It's a bold move. We have a lot of questions and doubts, mind you. We understand there's many more things to be clarified. We've learned a little bit just from today's sessions that there's much more to be learned about it. But we certainly hope that the city will find a way to establish strong measures that will guarantee its effectiveness over the long term. Because we don't know really what kind of tools are going to guarantee that kind of protection, but we're very anxious to find out and support it. Now, once if the gold belt is in place, after the urban boundary is definitively established in this comprehensive review, there will remain gaps between the gold belt and that urban boundary at various points around the boundary. And these lands, I guess purposely, will be exposed to eventual urban expansion. But we would call on the city to take measures to really forestall urban expansion in these gap lands until at least 2046. We're looking to provide a supply now out to 2046. And while we're dealing with the climate emergency, we can't forget the climate emergency. We're right in it, and it's going to come at us even faster and more drastically. And from now till 2050, we have to take every measure we can to protect ourselves from it. So we would call on the city to look at measures to forestall urban expansion into these gap lands through till 2046. Now, regarding the current growth management plan, which is not quite finished, there's still this 270 hectares, about 25,000 people that we don't know where we're going to place yet. And the studies that are being proposed regarding the 3 potential new communities, anxious to see where that goes. So we take no position on any of the selection of lands or communities. However, in the staff report for the last meeting that set out the ground rules for this exercise, it was pretty clear that this situation was anticipated, that maybe not enough lands would be found. And in that event, there's a procedure, it's laid out in the staff report, which referred to, which says, should there not be enough land, number one, we would consider increasing intensification levels to ensure that there's a sufficient supply of housing. It's not of land, but of housing for these 25,000 people we haven't placed anywhere inside the built-up area. That's in there as an option. Option two was do the kind of exercise that is currently being proposed. Look at suboptimal lands and look at the costs of bringing those lands in and making a best choice out of that. Option three in the staff report was use agricultural lands, but that was taken off the table by council at the May 27th approval. So we're asking you that in the report, add a fourth option, not just 1, 2, 3, not just distributed, 3 concentrated ones, 1 concentrated one, but add the need to do a cost benefit between the best of those and increasing the intensification rate. Wouldn't need a lot to supply that housing through intensification. By 2026, you'll know how the take-up is going. It seems to be just due diligence to do the whole job, not look at one side only of the equation, expansion lands, look at the other side, the intensification rate, and see, okay, what's the smart thing to do here to find where we're going to put these 25,000 people that are projected to come to, to us from here to 2046. So that's our requests. We'd just like to thank the city for including in the report amending or making changes to the site alteration bylaw and the tree protection bylaw to cover the urban expansion lands during this process so as to avoid preemptive clearing of those lands, something we've been asking for a long time, and we're glad to see it in this report. That's our submissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do have a question for you, Paul, from Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair Harder, and thank you, Paul, for being here. I think you've hit on an important point about those 270 hectares. From my reading of the report and the various appendices, it looks as though staff are going to be evaluating on a yearly basis the amount of intensification we're seeing until 2026, and whether we're on the target, under the target, or above the target. And it seems to reason to me that if we're intensifying greater than we anticipated, which has happened, many of the greenfield lands that were previously set out by other councils have been intensifying faster than anticipated and have the room to do it even quicker than was anticipated, as you pointed out in previous submissions. So it seems to reason to me that if that is the case, that council shouldn't eliminate that option. That if we're intensifying at a 65% rate, at a higher rate, why would we go and find additional lands that may not be needed? And that this staff report coming back for 2026 Q4, whenever it comes, I think we earmarked it for Q4 of 2026, that we get that analysis and say, well, maybe we are intensifying faster than we anticipated. Why would we expand at that point if we've got enough to satisfy the provincial policy statement? Is that what you're getting at in your submission here?
Yeah, I think that, thank you for that question, Councillor Menard. Yeah, I think that's exactly the point. I think there are really 4 options here. There's a major one, which is let's do more expansion and exactly where, but equally possible and consistent with the PPS and consistent with previous council direction would be not to add any lands at all if we can in fact accommodate the 25,000 additional residents we need to find homes for through intensification, through regeneration of neighborhoods, through the plan that we have. We have a very effective plan going forward to regenerate neighborhoods.
Okay, and I just wanted to get clarity on one of your other points, if that's okay, Madam Chair. Just my last question to Mr. Johannes here. It is, you said use the gap areas between the Gold Belt and the current urban boundary to intensify, rather than I just want to seek clarity in what you were saying there, because I wasn't understanding it. When I look at the gold belt, I see some donut holes in there. I see areas that it appears that there could be, further potential expansion in the future, although that's contradictory to what document 1 has said in one of the statements. So I'm just trying to get an understanding of what you were saying there on your first point about the gold belt of where to intensify. I didn't quite understand that.
Thank you, Councilor Menard, give me an opportunity to clarify. It's just that once the gold belt is established and the eventual urban boundary clarified from this comprehensive review, there will be certain spots along the urban boundary where there's a gap, where there's land that's not either in the gold belt or in the urban area. So these are going to be rural lands that are going to be exposed to urban expansion, I expect, at some point in the future, in the very far future, perhaps, hopefully. Because we're in a climate emergency, we're saying that we should try and resist expanding into this gap area until at least 2046. We're supposed to get full land supply in place now till 2046. Can we find measures in the face of the climate emergency to not expand into these gap lands until we're over that hump, until we know we're at a point where we've done what we need to do to mitigate climate change, that we've learned as a planetary community to regulate the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. At that point, we're in a new world, and maybe then we could be looking at, okay, how do we grow?
Okay, is that right now staff's plan is not to, the plan that they've laid out in front of us anyway, says that we would not expand into those areas, correct?
Yes, that's correct. For now, I guess the next opportunity to expand in those areas is likely 2036, or 2031, I guess, the first 10-year mandatory review of this comprehensive review would probably be the next opportunity to examine expanding into those areas. Correct?
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Thank you, Paul. The next speaker is Murray. Murray, this is your 10-minute time slot. And then followed by Kevin Murphy, Ursula Mounds, Nat Nasrallah, and Miguel Tremblay, along with Peter Moroz. So Murray, over to you.
Thanks again, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the 10 minutes. And thanks, Melody, for putting up this image. So let me start again by saying I'm hoping that members of the Joint Committee have seen and read the written submission that was circulated to members on Friday, once again under the cover of my colleague, an email from my colleague Adam Thompson. So back in May of 2020, the conclusion of the debate on the growth management strategy was a direction from Council for staff to go out and find 1,281 hectares of land to be added to the urban area. Staff went away and completed what they've called Pass 1 and identified 665.26 hectares of land. That recommendation rounds out Canada North to the March Road. It rounds out Barhaven South to Barnsdale Road, providing, as staff call it, a clear delineation between the urban area north of Barnsdale and the agricultural resource area to the south. It added lands along Bowesville Road, as illustrated in front of you now, and added some lands around Orleans. That first pass came up short 615 hectares. So staff, instead of looking at agricultural lands, as was directed by Council, went back and did a second pass. And that second pass identified an additional 345.74 hectares. Still short by 270 hectares, which is generating a fair amount of discussion today. Once again, rather than looking at agricultural resource lands as candidate areas for urban expansion, staff have indicated, well, we'll study this for another 5 years and try to figure out where best to go to provide that additional 270 hectares. I would remind the members of committee that your professional planning staff never recommended that agricultural resource land should not be considered for urban expansion. The lands I'm showing you on this image in front of you, those lands east of River Road, north of Rideau Road, and west of the Bowesville lands, totals 345 hectares. Would it put a significant dent in the past two lands and would actually eliminate the shortfall of 270 hectares that you're struggling with today? These lands would score significantly higher than all of the past two lands. These lands would score significantly higher than the Category 2 lands. These lands would score significantly higher than the Category 3 lands. Why is that? It's because they are close to transit. They are close to LRT stations that have already been funded and one of which is under construction, well within 1,900 meters of planned transit. They would also score well because of their servicing capacity. Plans for the Riverside South community and the master servicing study completed for the Riverside community years ago identified capacity for the development of these lands. So the gold belt that we're talking about today is intended to establish a hard line between the urban area and agricultural lands. In the west, that hard line will be defined by Fluellen Road, Fernbank Road, Hopeside Road, and Barnsdale Road, and in the east by Wall Road and Trim Road. Here is an opportunity to define that line using Rideau Road. Arterial roads and collectors should be used to determine the boundary of the urban area. It shouldn't be a fence in the middle of a field where on one side of that fence you have children playing in the backyard swimming pool, and on the other side of that fence you have a field of soybeans that have been fertilized. Maybe manure's been spread, maybe herbicides have been sprayed, and maybe pesticides have been sprayed. It is good planning to use an existing physical feature to define the limit of the urban boundary, and that line in this part of the city would logically be Rideau Road. Madam Chair, members of committee, I draw your attention to page 6 of document 1 of the staff report, where staff say, in addition to clustering parcels with appropriate transit, distance, and/or servicing scores, which these properties clearly would have scored well, staff have endeavored to ensure that the future urban boundary has a coherent and rational delineation. This is desirable because isolated parcels or irregular boundary are less efficiently added to the public service area and would also result in an irregular mobility network that is less likely to support transit and 15-minute neighborhoods. A rational urban boundary also helps to reinforce the separation between the suburban and rural transit areas. Features used to determine a logical boundary include existing arterial streets, major collectors, components of the natural heritage system, and geographical features such as creeks and rivers. Madam Chair, Chair El-Shantiri, I would encourage committee and council to reconsider the direction given to staff in May of last year and score these parcels and evaluate them in due consideration of their accessibility to the LRT, accessibility to services, and accessibility to all of the features planned and developed in the Riverside South community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Murray. And Scott Moffat has a question for you. Councillor Moffat?
Thanks, Marie. Just a comparative question. I mean, we don't necessarily look at these on a specific landowner or specific client perspective. We look at it from the bigger picture. So you look at these lands, all which score above 160 in our LEAR, as you know, because you're on the LEAR working group. So you know their position as primary agricultural lands.
Yes.
You believe that they should be scored higher because of proximity to transit. Now let's go to the west end. Let's look at Fluellen. So we're proposing to come down to Fluellen and Shea. A lot of land between Shea and Eagleston, Terry Fox, north of Fluellen. Now we have Robert Grant right to the north. That's where transit's going to come down to. What would prevent you or anyone else from arguing that all those lands north of Fluellen wouldn't have the same logical arguments as the lands north of Rideau that you're arguing for right now?
So I anticipated that question. I've anticipated that question for many, many months. The difference here is we're drawing the line in the middle of the field. The difference in the west is the line is clearly defined by a road, and crossing that road is a major step. Here, extending this community to Rideau Road and then using Rideau Road as the definition of what could become that inside limit to the Gold Belt. So Rideau Road defines the Gold Belt. Hope Side Road defines the Gold Belt. Fluellen Road or Fernbank Road would define the Gold Belt. So you've got a logical, rational boundary. That line wandering through the fields north of Rideau Road makes no sense whatsoever.
Thanks. I will just say that prior to 2008, the logical boundary was Hazeldean, and it was moved down to Fernbank. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Moffat. I don't see anybody else waving. Marie, so thank you for coming out several times today. Next
Thank
up
you very
is
much, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Marie. Kevin Murphy, Vice President, Land Development, Mattamy Homes, Canada. Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
You have 5 minutes and you're followed by Ursula. Hi, Ursula. I see you there. Matt and Israela. Matt's there too. Okay, go ahead, Kevin.
Thanks. Thanks, members of the Joint Committee. I am pleased to appear today and would first like to thank staff for their work to date on Ottawa's new official plan. I also appear today to challenge key recommendations summarized in this second growth management report. Key events in Ottawa's urban boundary planning history support my belief that, again, Ottawa is being too cautious in planning for future growth. In 2009, the city approved an urban boundary expansion of 230 hectares, but was directed by the OMB in 2011 to expand by 850 hectares. In 2013, OPA 150 was approved, and after appeal, the OMB ruled the city should further extend its planning horizon from 2031 to 2036. In 2017, OPA 180 was approved, and in the spring of 2019, Mattamy was preparing for an LPAT hearing to argue that additional land should have been added to the urban boundary at that time. That hearing was then adjourned pending the outcome of this new official plan, although Mattamy has not fully surrendered its OPA 180 appeal. By ignoring Council's approval of this Joint Committee's recommendation to add 1,281 hectares as part of the new official plan, I'm concerned that once again, an insufficient quantity of land will be added to the urban boundary to support the growth of our city. And I'm sure it will not surprise any member of the Joint Committee that Mattamy would have preferred the lands at 800 Cedarview Road to be approved as Category 1 lands in the current report. And this is especially disappointing given that Mattamy has provided professional opinions to support the case that our Cedarview lands, while not perfectly match the evaluation criteria, should have scored very well. Mattamy feels that senior staff should have been more generous in evaluating these lands, especially due to their exceptionality as we had previously identified. The question is not whether these lands should be developed, but what is the form that this residential development should take. Given the City of Ottawa's stated intensification objectives, approving these lands for urban development, thus allowing a much higher density than the currently slated 1 acre estate lots, is, to put it candidly, the proper planning approach. The resulting development charges from increased density would go a long way towards paying for those road and transit infrastructure upgrades needed to support the immediately adjacent, fastest growing commercial and employment node in the city. It is my belief that this oversight can be corrected, however. There are a number of other considerations to support reevaluating not just Mattamy lands at Cedarview, but also any of the Category 2 lands identified in the report. Specifically, the intensification rates proposed under the balanced approach scenario are very aggressive and may not be met in either the near or long term. The city's current deferred approach to implementing the urban boundary expansion could further exacerbate a land supply shortfall. The city staff report from August 22nd, 2019 specifically stated that the 25-year time horizon for the new official plan was proposed to better manage funding mechanisms for growth-related infrastructure. Setting aside 270 hectares so that staff may consider adding future neighborhoods will cause a 5-year delay in any allocation of appropriate planning and funding. I'm confident that staff could appropriately identify additional lands that meet the evaluation criteria in the 5 big moves, immediately including the 1,281 hectares of land recommended by the Joint Committee does not preclude staff from further analyzing lands within options 1, 2, and 3 for a future expansion. Setting aside 270 hectares for consideration as future neighborhoods is only kicking the can down the road, while potentially magnifying a looming land shortfall and further eroding housing affordability. I'm hopeful that members of the Joint Committee will today decide not to direct staff to set aside land for future study, but instead direct staff to reevaluate Category 2.
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin.
Today.
1 minute, Chair.
Oh, was there on what? Keep going, Kevin. Sorry.
No, that's all I had. That was my wrap up.
Wasn't trying to scare you away. When I hear that dinger, I mean, I expected Melody to be all over me and saying, Chair, it's 5 minutes.
No problem.
Does anyone have any questions? Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out, Kevin. Next up, we have Ursula, as I said, Ursula Mellons, and then followed by Matt Nazarella, Miguel Tremblay, and Peter Moras, and then James Gallivan. Welcome, Ursula.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, we have a plan to put up, not that one. The Gold Belt plan with Kavanaugh. And just to set the stage, Madam Chair, we did provide written submissions to the city on Friday. I will be speaking to the higher level issues in regards to the Gold Belt, and Matt Nazralla will address some Kavanaugh specific parcels. Have we found the plan?
It's coming.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Perfect, yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. As always, this has been an interesting process to get to, of course, where we are, which is growth management 2. It's very significant to note that the Gold Belt proposition was not made known to either my client Kavanaugh or even the industry at large. I'm sorry, I have to turn that off. Apologize that I turned all the phones off. It was not made known to us prior to last Friday when this Growth Management 2 report was released. So needless to say, we've had 5 days to try and get a better understanding or appreciation for it. There have been discussions with staff and councillors. I look forward to Councillor Dudas's direction coming forward because there are many unknowns and questions in regards to this Gold Belt. As Mr. Chown previously said, the report as it states does say that this is meant to be a protection for agricultural and aggregate resources. But as Mr. Nazralla will speak, we know of several instances of parcels of land that are neither, that are currently proposed to be included in the green belt. So we do indeed take exception to that and we'll be seeking a remedy for that. And it's important to note that the direction going forward, I hope, will include the consideration as to whether or not the green belt is actually required. Gold Belt, pardon me, is required. The Toronto Green Belt itself was established through specific legislation. That was a provincial direction, whereas we do not have the same being applied in this case. Although perhaps a laudable goal in some respects, we have to make sure it's properly assessed that lands that should be included in it are indeed included. And just like those that should be excluded are excluded. There are large tracts of the natural heritage overlay that are not currently proposed to be in the Gold Belt. And it needs to be looked at a very holistic level. So notwithstanding our proposition that the gold belt as a principle should be studied, we do look forward to receiving the policies proposed and having that discussion with staff going forward. Kavanaugh would like to be involved in those discussions. And we think it's important that certain parcels of land should be excluded based on the fact that they don't satisfy the criteria as staff have currently stated. So subject to that, I was going to turn it over to Mr. Nasrallah, where he could address the Kavanaugh specific parcels, and then we could take questions jointly, or I can answer any questions you have at this time directly.
No, that works out fine. I mean, I'll ask Ms. Stephanie to keep track of the time, and we'll go right to Matt Nasrallah, who's right after you on the list. Matt?
Thank you, Chair Harder, Chair El Shantiri, members of committee. I'm the manager of Kavanaugh Developments, and further to written submissions that my friend Ms. Mullins referenced from last week. I just want to bring to your attention the fact that the very limited information that has been made public concerning the proposed Gold Belt provision in the Growth Management Report, it fails to make concessions for lands that have existing status within the city. I know they've been referenced here today, but page 43 of the report continues to state that the Gold Belt will prohibit further development except for agricultural severances and mineral extraction. We would like staff and members of these committees to recognize that Kavanaugh Developments holds over 500 hectares of land, parcels of which you see identified on this plan, within the proposed Gold Belt, representing one industrial site within the Carp Road corridor and 7 estate lot subdivisions at various states of approval that are designated for sterilization to the letter of this proposal. Included in these lands are parcels with legal status with the City of Ottawa, obtained through minutes of settlement based on Kavanaugh Developments dropping appeals to previous official plans, as well as a concrete ready-mix plant with a site recently rezoned by the city and the same rezoning decision recently upheld by LPAT. We respectfully request that the Gold Belt concept be removed from the growth study and added to the official plan document so that the draft policy details can be discussed and reviewed and add additional detail prior to proceeding. In order to address these egregious oversights, we feel there's no other way to make sure our interests are protected. Barring an opportunity for additional review or discussion, we respectfully request that the staff report be amended to include specific exclusions from the Gold Belt for parcels with existing planning or legal status that are proposed to be enveloped by the proposed Gold Belt. I understand through the conversations today that some references have been made to that potentially being in the works, but until that's documented in a way that we're satisfied, we'll continue to register the same concerns. Thank you, Madam Chair, Chair El Shantiri, and members of committee for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Nasrallah, and thank you, Ursula. Mr. Nasrallah, I do believe you sent us your submission, I believe Friday evening or Friday afternoon. And just for the record, I did ask our legal to respond to your email and to your questions. So we're not here to ask staff, but I just want to. My understanding from staff, that will be whatever been approved before, that will be reconfirmed or renegotiated. But I let legal talk about it. So we already have your submission. I already sent your question to legal, and once we start asking staff questions, hopefully our staff can clarify.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I don't see any question to both. Thank you very much to both of you. And next is Mr. Tremblay.
And Peter Moroz.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
We can, Miguel.
Yes, we can. But maybe you don't have your mic on, Miguel.
You're on mute.
Yeah, I keep getting kicked out. So if you don't mind, I'll just stop my video in the event that that's the issue. And then I'll reopen it up if there's any questions. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I'm a partner at Fotan Consultants, and I'm here with Peter Moroz from Stantec Consulting Engineers. in light of staff's comments, I think we will be very brief together, but I may steal a little bit of Peter's time because I'm going to be doing the lion's share, if not all of the presentation. I'm speaking today on behalf of Falcon Ridge Village Limited Partnership, the owners of the existing Falcon Ridge Golf Course, which is a large 132 hectare, roughly 328 acre parcel located in the Riverside South cluster, reviewed earlier today by Mr. Herwire. More specifically, the lands are immediately south and only about 230 meters from the Bowesville LRT station and south of the future Earl Armstrong extension, which is proposed to bisect the northeast portion of the lands. As you may recall, Earl Armstrong Road is proposed to be a transit priority corridor and is also an EA approved road, which were all important considerations in the urban boundary criteria. The lands are also south of the Ottawa International Airport and also abut the airport's 2038 master plan boundary, having immediately adjacent to the Rideau Carleton Raceway and Hartrop International immediately across the street on Albion Road. As per the staff report and the recommendations and document number 2, the western portion of the lands, approximately 159 acres, are identified as Category 1 lands and are recommended to be included in the urban boundary. I'm speaking in support of the staff recommendation to include these lands in the urban boundary, corresponding with recommendation number 3 in your report. For the benefit of both committees, I wanted to briefly summarize the evaluation carried out by staff and maybe add a little bit of my own considerations. The lands are strategically located to allow the design and development of a true smart growth 15-minute residential community immediately south and in proximity to the Bowesville LRT station and the Earl Armstrong corridor. The lands are immediately east of Riverside South and allow for the continuity of that community fabric. Given the size and configuration of the lands, there are opportunities to create a new mixed-use town or village center and offer a diversity of housing typologies ranging from apartments to ground-oriented units and well-planned community amenities. In fact, an early version of the concept plan already includes a new district park and neighborhood parks to meet community needs. In keeping with some of the earlier comments from councillors, the lands can contribute to economic development in the south end of the city, in close proximity to the city's affordable transit and road mobility network, including specifically Armstrong Road Extension and the transit station. Given abutting uses and important major community facilities in the area, the lands are well suited to contribute to an economic hub to align with the goals of the airport special district and also create a new tourist destination to support the future success of the Rideau Carleton Raceway. On this point, both the owners and FOTEN are looking very much forward to working with the city's policy branch in the near future on a new secondary plan to allow well-integrated and coordinated community-wide vision. Further points in that there are no wetlands, agricultural lands, or mature urban forests impacting the properties, and quite the opposite. The lands are characterized by abandoned rail corridors and hydro corridors, facilitating some additional pedestrian linkages to the transit station. Lastly, in terms of municipal servicing, both sanitary, water, are with sufficient capacity are located approximately 0.8 kilometers to the abutting Riverside South community to the west of Falcon Ridge Village lands. On this point, if needed, Peter Stantec can respond to any additional servicing inquiries. So for all of these reasons, we are in agreement and support the staff recommendation related to these lands as Category 1 lands to be added to the urban boundary included in the circulation of the new official plan. Peter and I would be happy to respond to any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miguel. I don't see any hands waving. Thank you for coming out today.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Next up, we have James Galligan, followed by Mikael Mikalski, Neil Malhotra, and Marcel Deneme. So first up is James Gallivan, sorry.
I'd like to thank the committee chairs and committee members for allowing me to speak today. I'm a private citizen interested in planning. The draft official plan that we have in front of us today is a great plan, but it is for another time. Over the past year, COVID-19 happened and it disrupted everything. Yet the plan to guide the spending of billions of dollars of public and private sector money to develop the built environment of the city of Ottawa has not kept pace. This draft grew up in the pre-COVID era. Look and you'll find that it does not mention COVID-19 even once. Now, I presume that the official plan, with its focus on density planning and 15-minute neighborhoods, has been under development for years. In fact, I heard it started in 2019. In contrast, COVID-19 is a very late arrival. It's a shock, a challenge, disruptive, and immensely powerful. The Americans are saying that it's already killed more people than WW2. Along the way, daily routine and plans have been blown out of the water. We've heard the feeble hopes that everything will return to normal soon. It comes from our governments, the media, and from each other. We hear, don't worry, the kids will be back in school in 2 weeks. Workers will return to their downtown office space in a few months. Transportation volumes will rebound. And because of that rebound, we're going to be able to continue projects to increase mass transport capacity. And lastly, don't worry, this is not a permanent change. The Spotifys of this world have got it wrong. Those are all nice, positive thoughts. I might call them happy aspirations or maybe even magical thinking. Before the current draft was produced, I contacted the official plan team to suggest that they address the glaring omission of COVID-19 in the plan. I'd like to thank the team for meeting with me. The November draft that we have in front of us has a few superficial and aspirational statements about COVID-19, not about COVID-19, but public health. I began to realize that the official plan is a big ship. The planning team can't turn it on a dime, and there are powerful forces that would prefer action, permits, and development rather than more planning. So to ask for more time to get the plan right could be an immensely unpopular move. On page 33, the text exclaims, this official plan recognizes the interdependencies between health and the built environment. There are two types of recognition. By the flourish of a pen to write a single sentence, and by means of doing the hard work of building a plan, assigning resources, executing thousands of hours of work, and delivering results. When I talk about recognition, I mean the second type. On page 10 of the official plan, we see 5 planning pillars, each a plan in its own right, and integrated into the official plan. They are on infrastructure, transportation, green space, climate change, housing, and let's add an important new pillar, public health. Show the resources allocated to public health as a percentage of the city budget. Is it 1%, 10%, 30%? Certainly if we're spending amounts like 30%, and that might very well be, we should have a plan for it. Develop schedules for re-engineering the built environment to make it safe during pandemics. Define the scope of work and who will lead the health and built interaction. Track key indicators such as cases and deaths, which you have up in front of you, you can see. Track how we're doing compared to others. You know, it's not always grim news. In Appendix A of my written submission, I show these graphs, which show that currently Ottawa is outperforming both the rest of Ontario and the rest of Canada in cases and deaths. And we can do even better. Let's ask the city planners to model the effect of COVID-19 on immigration, population growth, population distribution, the city's transportation plan, the use of downtown office space, work from home, land use, densities. Yes, it's a big ask. But until the official plan is revised to reflect the city being hit by probably the biggest shock in 100 years, it should not be trusted to guide the spending of billions of public and private sector dollars. Members of the Joint Committee, this concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much. We do have questions for you from Councillor Eglai.
Councillor Egler.
Are you there,
Right.
Keith?
Yes, I am. Sorry about that. I was having a problem with my camera there. It's not so much a question for the delegation. I just wanted to assure the delegation as the chair of public health. I don't sit on either of these committees, but I can tell you that the city did a rather unique thing for this go around for the official plan, and that is that public health is part of the process. Public health has a planner that's working with the planning department to take into account issues in and around public health. So I just wanted you to be aware of that, Mr. Galligan, that public health is engaged. And I want to thank Steve Willis and also Chair Harder for recognizing the importance of having public health as part of the planning process leading to the new official plan. So we are engaged. We have a professional planner engaged on it. So I just want you to be aware of that, sir. We are definitely in the mix and part of the discussion going forward.
Thank you very much, Councillor Egli.
I did meet with the representative from Public Health.
That's great. I don't see anyone else waving, so thank you for coming out today, sir. The next person up is Mikael Mikalski.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Joint Committee. I'm speaking with you today. I'm a real estate broker with my wife. Speaking to you today, again, similar to Jason McDonald and Sean Hamilton. I represent two clients with land parcels along Hawthorne Road. And we're looking at the urban boundary. And if you look at the bottom of the map of the urban boundary, you can see kind of a what I call a boot. And just east of that is the parcels of land that we're talking about. So we're really talking about parcel of land that to the north you have Louis Sayes Road, to the south you have Rideau Road, to the east Ramseyville Road, and to the west Hawthorne. And that's just a little bit east of the Finley Creek subdivision development there along Bank Street. And right now the work is happening between Bank Street and Hawthorne. So as soon as that subdivision is completed, which should be in the next few years, we're looking at the next expansion of the city. So it seems that across the street on Hawthorne, it would be probably quite efficient for the city to expand into that area. And if you look at that space there, it's about 200 hectares. But if we looked at the first portion of it, the north portion, it would be around 100 hectares. And you already have a golf course there, so it provides for a really good quality of living there. And we were just wondering, because right now the land is designated as vacant residential. So because it's so close to the urban boundary, we're looking to see if council would be open to potentially amalgamating that as part of the official plan. Thank you.
I don't see any question for you. Thank you very much for your presentation. And our next presenter is Neil Hartrop, and I believe, Neil, you have John Riddell with you. Are you doing John's presentation? Neil, are you on?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Apologies. Okay. Yes, John's going to join me, so I'll just do a little bit of an introduction on the issue. I'm presenting specifically in regards to 6435 Fernbank Road on the score sheet listed as S5, 6, and 7 in the Stittsville catchment area. We're coming to committee today. We've been, as some of the committee members may know, we have been working with staff since the release of the report to review specific issues of scoring where we believe there was conflicting facts and you know, just I guess to outline the work that's gone in so far. We have made a couple of submissions through John's team outlining specific issues we thought that were errors in scoring in related very specifically to geotechnical information as well as capacities in the existing neighborhood on the servicing. We met staff Thursday evening, so about 4 or 5 days after the report. And I guess we want to thank staff. They've worked very hard over the last 4 or 5 days in seriously reviewing the information we had presented. We did receive communication back from staff and sort of the response and continued disagreement on some of the facts regarding the servicing scoring related to these parcels, as well as S8 and S9, which are lands belonging to another proponent. I'll kick it over to John, but ultimately our ask at this stage is for a direction to staff to continue to work with us to solve the issues. The letter we received yesterday at 2 o'clock addressing our concerns did introduce some new information that does not actually exist in the document 2 presenting how scoring was based on the areas. So at this stage, that would be our primary request. We do believe that the facts do show that this land should be scoring as a Pass 1, Schedule 1. So with that, I'll pass it to John. He can walk through the specific issues, and then we can answer any questions.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to speak to this. As Neil said, Novatech has spent considerable time and effort analyzing the scoring for basically the Stittsville Westland. So it's the parcels S5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, so north of Fernbank Road and south of Fernbank Road. And while we agree with most of the scores, or we've come to terms on most of the scores that have been provided by staff, we're convinced that on a couple of servicing categories, and primarily where the properties have been scored under the magic number of 14, that they have been underscored, and that if these scores are corrected based on our analysis, both the parcels north and south of Fernbank Road, west side of Stittsville, would score 14 or more, and then therefore would meet the category for inclusion as Category 1 lands. So as Neil said, we've had a little bit of back and forth with staff. The latest response from staff that we got yesterday, we're still in a disagreement on a couple of categories, but those are pretty key categories. If they're corrected as we think they should be, as I said, both those parcels would score 14 or more and meet the criteria. So as Neil said, I think we just want to have the opportunity to continue those discussions with staff over the next week or so to identify and respond to the issues that they've raised, so that we can convince them that the scoring needs to be adjusted. And the scoring centers around drainage issues and interpretation of drainage issues, and whether or not submerged sewers are required, which is a fairly significant scoring category. So that's the technical part of it, but we're just looking for that opportunity to continue those discussions with staff.
Okay, thank you both, John and Neil, and we have a couple of questions. So we'll start with Councillor Leeper. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. This is actually very helpful. I have tended to believe that staff have taken council's instructions away and applied those rigorously to give us the current proposal. I voted against an expansion of the urban boundary, obviously, but those conditions are critical to ensuring that the parcels that are recommended for inclusion have the least impact on the city's sustainability. So it is particularly interesting to me that I think you are the first to assert an actual error that is objective, and not just asking that we pass something through that may have been marginal. I appreciate the further precision you added at the end of the presentation with respect to it's a matter of determining whether or not submerged sewers are required. And it sounds like that is the difference between a pass and a fail on this one. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and that should be objectively determined, I assume, through discussions with staff. How many net hectares is this?
The two parcels, I apologize, I don't have the numbers, but I think the northern parcel is about net of just over 100 acres, so 40 hectares. The southern parcel is a little bit less, perhaps in the range of 30 hectares.
Okay, that's obviously really significant. We'll want to have this sorted out sooner rather than later. So just again, I'll have a question for staff with respect to their view on this disagreement, but I do appreciate the further clarity. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Gower, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a comment, not a question, but I know over the last week, there has been some back and forth with staff, and I'll be asking staff for a little bit more information later. I mean, at some point, there will be disagreements between landowners and between staff evaluation, and I'd like to understand a little bit more from staff about what the process looks like when Party A does not agree with Party B. I have some concerns about this property in general. It is within that 1,900-meter transit radius, but if I'm trying to figure out as the councillor for Stittsville, how on earth people would actually get to the transit. There's, I think, one pathway in the middle of this. It's really not well integrated. And the other concern that I would have here would be around the proximity to wetlands and what the effect would be, how development could be mitigated so it's not harming the large wetland and conservation areas just west. But I will direct that to staff, but thank you for the presentation. And this is one that I'm obviously keeping tabs on as we go through our days here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And that's all the questions we have for John and Neil. Our next speaker is Marcel Deneau, Vice President, Land Development, Urbandale. Marcel. Marcel, you're on.
Yeah, okay. Do I have my, okay, perfect. Good day, everybody. Thank you, Chair Harder and El Shantiri and members of the committee for giving me this opportunity today to speak to the committee. My name is Marcel Denemy. I'm Vice President of Land Development of Urbandale Corporation. Urbandale Corporation owns lands across the city and they've been a community builder for over 60 years in Ottawa. I'm here to promote one of our properties for urban expansion in Riverside South. Next slide, please. This slide shows our property that in question, which is in pink at below at the bottom of the page, adjacent to the Trillium Line LRT. Next slide, please. This slide shows our lands highlighted in yellow, I mean, in more detail, adjacent to the boundary in Riverside South. Of note on this map, the old LRT alignment is shown in black dashed line north of Earl Armstrong, and the new Trillium Line, which is south of Earl Armstrong. The original limit of Phase 2 Trillium Line was to stop at Bowesville Station due to funding constraint. The 3.6 kilometer extension of Trillium Line to the line bank station was added after additional funding was secured by the province and an area-specific DC on all permits in Riverside South in 2019. Next slide, please. This shows the CDP, current CDP, with the new alignment. And of note, I think down at the bottom right corner, you see the collector roads with the gray arrows sort of continuing south beyond the boundary, which is obviously anticipated a future expansion. And these are the lands that I'm speaking of right now. Next slide, please. This slide shows the parcels that staff have scored in Riverside South. And as directed by council, staff did not score the brown color area west of R2 lands right now, as they were designated agricultural resource. Next slide, please. This slide highlights our lands that is designated R2, rural, the R2 lands, which were recommended, and designated agricultural resource R1 lands in light green. I superimposed two radiuses, one 1.5 and one 1.9 kilometers, circled around the line bank station that is under construction. Those are the blue lines, and the future Mosquito, also the future station east of Mosquito in orange. Applying the 5 big moves from the draft OP, our R1 lands score high on the big move, more specifically moves number 2 and 4, which are mobility and environment and climate change. The majority of R1 lands are within a 15-minute walking distance to a high-order light rail transit system. And if the city wants to achieve goals of 50% of trips by sustainable mode by 2046, these lands should not be ignored and would also be a major missed opportunity of having development walking distance to high-order LRT. This also will help the city achieve the objective of reducing greenhouse gas, as 40% of cities' greenhouse gas is transportation related. I also took the liberty of scoring R1 lands using the same criteria from staff report. The result is a score of 74, which is the highest of all parcels scored by staff. The fact that R1 lands have agricultural resource designation should not cause the parcels to be sterilized or ignored. We agree that ag land should be protected and avoided to protect food security. However, in some cases, it is impractical to avoid. Next slide, please. This shows the existing trunk sanitary sewer that was constructed in 2006 by Riverside South Development Corporation, well in advance of the need in order to address the servicing issue at the Rideau-Carleton Raceway. The sewer was also oversized to accommodate future urban expansion south to Rideau Road. The benefit of this foresight thinking of oversizing the trunk sanitary is that there is no big extra infrastructure required, just as pump station, to service our lands in question as they can be serviced by a gravity system. Next slide, please. I'll skip this slide just so we can get on to the next one. This is a rendering of the line bank station and current picture of the construction progress of the line bank station. The scheduled completion date for the Trillium Line Phase 2 is 2022, which is the same year of the OP, the same year that the OP is scheduled to be approved by the province. This offers a unique opportunity for development of lands within the 1.5 kilometer radius of the Trillium Line to create the city's vision of a 15-minute neighborhood served by a higher order LRT system. Approving urban expansion within that radius is what I would define as smart growth. Next slide. This is a very preliminary.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure that Councillor Meehan, if she's still here, has a question for you.
Well,
Do you, Councillor
Derouse
Meehan?
first.
Oh, Councillor Derouse first. Councillor Derouse? Your mic's not working again, George. You need your headset on, I think.
No, you mute yourself. Nothing.
He's coming. Try it again, George. Try it.
Can
Say
you?
something.
No.
Oh, there you go.
And now.
There you go.
Yes. Go ahead.
Go ahead, George.
Can you hear me right now?
Yeah, we can.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Sorry for the technical difficulties today, but I have a quick question for Mr. For Marcel. How I know you mentioned the distance between the LRT station that it's been constructed now on Line Bank, and what's the radius you are trying to explain to the committee, the radius, and what is the contribution of urban there to make this to make the LRT come to Riverside South? If you can talk a little bit about that.
So on the map, I had two radiuses. One was 1.5 kilometers, which was the smaller one. And then the other one was 1.9, which is based on the criteria of the scoring. And a good chunk of the lands, I would say, between Line Bank and Mosquito Creek that are right now designated ag are within those radiuses. As far as the contribution, well, the extension from Bowesville to the Line Bank station was in the order of $80 million. The province came up with the $50 million to meet the gap, and then there's the special area DC is there to fund the additional $30 million. And the funding mechanism is not like a pure call it that we're contributing. It's more about bridging the gap between now and the 2031 when the extension was going to happen.
Thank you, Marcel. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for clarifying this.
Okay.
Councillor Meehan?
I just want to also a little bit of clarification. Mr. Dename, if this is ag land that you're sitting on right now, but if that doesn't get developed or it continues to be protected, does that mean there's a big chunk of development on one side of the Trillium Line that will have no housing or customers to support the line?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right now, the LRT line that's under construction is within 200 meters of the boundary right now. So if the ag land stays sterilized, then there's a huge missed opportunity to have development close to those two future stations, to support the transit.
And just explain what did you call it? The oversized sewage trunk sanitary line.
Yes.
Who installed that?
RSTC installed that in 2006, and I wasn't working with Urbandale back then, but from what I understand, the Rideau Carleton Raceway had issues with their sanitary sewer. RSTC front-ending the costs of the line all the way to Earl Armstrong, and the Rideau Carleton have a force main that pumps into it. This is back in 2006. And at the same time, there was some master servicing study that was ongoing, and it was determined at the time to oversize it to be able to accommodate future expansion from the existing boundary down to Rideau Road.
So what does the fact that that's there now, what does it mean to us? Like we won't have to put something, if development were to be allowed, we won't have to foot the cost of putting that in?
Well, yeah, correctly. Often when you're having to expand, you're into having to construct pumping station, which are a huge, big item, infrastructure item. And on the scoring, that usually gives you a negative score for your land. And the other part of this, I suppose, is because of the lands east of Bowesville right now are also being considered, then they technically could be, if our lands keep sterilized, then they could technically be taking our capacity away from us for future, which is an issue for RSDC.
Would you be reimbursed for that?
That's a good question. I wouldn't be able to comment on that right now, but there would have to be something of a, but we would prefer not to give up that capacity.
So the designation of ag lands, was this a surprise to you? I mean, you made this investment in the community, and then to be told that your lands won't be considered.
Well, yeah, well, the motion to not score ag land was obviously a surprise for us, yes. I mean, it's not that previous OP expansion never had that sort of sterilization of ag land. It was always scored, and in this case here, where you have LRT not planned but actually going to be there by 2022. I mean, that usually means you want to maximize on that infrastructure. I mean, it's not. This is like huge infrastructure. Like the whole Trillium Line Phase 2 upgrade is in the order of $700 million. So if you're gonna try to protect ag land, which we agree we should protect it, but in some cases, it's not very practical, I guess.
What's on that land now?
Well, right now it's been just cash crop, which is it's not well drained. It doesn't give us or it doesn't give the farmer, talking to the farmer, it doesn't give him much of a crop, depending on the year, depending on the weather. And obviously we have not made any investment of any tile draining on the land to make it better. So, if I were to sell it to a farmer tomorrow, he would have to spend a bunch of money to do that. And talking to the farmers these days, it usually is not, especially when you're adjacent to the boundary, it's not really, because the other part of this is I should explain is that the area east of which part of it is our land, that will create somewhat of a leapfrogging as you continue south. And the other part is that our lands on the east side, they need to drain to Mosquito Creek. So whatever infrastructure for storm that needs to whether it's a pipe or a channel to get to Mosquito Creek, that's going to further compromise these ag lands if ever there were to stay ag land.
Okay, I think I got it. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Thank you, Marcel, for coming out today. Next up, we have Kevin Sankmar. Kevin is followed by Neil DeRuiter, Michelle Tremblay. If Michelle is here, I'm going to be calling him a couple of times if he's not. Salma Al-Shahabi with Professor Lee is after Michelle. So, Kevin, floor is yours. Thank you for coming out.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Chairman, appreciate it. Hope all is well. My name's Kevin Sankmars. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Kavanaugh Group of Companies. Kavanaugh is the owner of about 800 acres of land west of Stittsville, south of Hazeldean Road, and south of Fernbank Road. And it's immediately butting the Hazeldean Road Highway 7 interchange that Ursula had highlighted earlier in her presentation. The lands are largely vacant with a mix of open fields, woodlands, and a designated wetland. Kavanaugh has status under the estate lot moratorium settlement reached with the City of Ottawa in 2013 to make application for an estate lot subdivision on these lands. So these lands are already designated for development by the city. As part of the staff report, staff are recommending some lands north of Hazeldean Road be added to the urban boundary as Category 1 lands. Some lands on the south side of Hazeldean Road through to Fernbank have also been considered for expansion and fall under Category 2 lands in the city's evaluation. At Fernbank Road, these lands are directly abutting our lands. Despite the provincially significant wetland in our lands, there remains a significant area that is available for development in proximity to the urban boundary and the major Highway 7 interchange. Our lands were not evaluated. The lands fulfill the exclusion criteria in that they're not agricultural and are not within the agricultural policy designation, but do not fulfill the minimum inclusion criteria, specifically given their distance from rapid transit, already highlighted by Councillor Gower. Had the lands been assessed by staff, I'm confident that they would have been deemed as Category 2 lands for the purposes of the report, given their proximity to jobs, retail, city facilities, and the existing urban boundary. Instead, the lands have been designated as part of the proposed Gold Belt. This area, per the report, is intended to protect agricultural resource lands together with natural environment and aggregate lands to contain the city's ultimate footprint, but would have the effect of sterilizing our lands, which are already agreed for development. I'd like to ask the committee to direct staff to remove the Gold Belt designation or reconsider the Gold Belt criteria on our land, and instead allow for the expansion of the city on carefully evaluated parcels in the future, instead of a blanket sterilization of the lands without assessment or evaluation or without consideration for previous legal agreements. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kevin. I don't see anybody waving, but I'm sure someone's going to ask that question tomorrow of staff. That's when we'll get into questions of staff. So thank you very much for coming out today. Next up, you're welcome. Next up is Neil DeRuiter. Am I right, Neil?
DeRuiter.
DeRuiter. Jeez,
Close.
That was my second guess. Okay, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, Chair Harder and Chair El-Shantiri and the Joint Committee members. My name's Neil DeRuiter. I'm a planner with MHBC Planning. I'm here on behalf of the Ontario Stone, Sand and Gravel Association, who represents local producers, aggregate producers in Ottawa and across the province. I'm going to try to be very quick. Our concerns primarily relate to the Gold Belt proposal. We have provided the committee with our written comments last week. When we took a look at the conceptual map of the Gold Belt, it's quite apparent it includes a huge area of the rural area, and that includes a number of pits and quarries as well as aggregate resource areas. And I would say a lot of these areas are the city's, both their existing and their future supply for close to market aggregate. To be quite frank, the Gold Belt came as a complete surprise to us. We're actively reviewing the draft official plan that came out. We didn't see it mentioned in the draft official plan. We haven't noted it in previous reports to council, so we were a bit surprised to see this. You know, we had acknowledged that the report does recognize that this is an area to protect and permit extraction, but at this point, we really don't have any certainty without any policies to properly understand the full effect and what the potential implications are. I guess I would also offer too, it's difficult for us right now to provide comments on the draft official plan, knowing full well it could substantially change how the rural areas planned as a result of the Gold Belt. I'd also note the comment about protecting these areas till the end of the century. Aggregate extractions and interim land use. That means it's not final. Rehabilitation has to occur, which can accommodate appropriate after uses. The question we would have for the committee, is it really reasonable to sterilize pits and quarries for potentially 80+ years? And I just want to make another quick comment based upon staff's comment this morning that the Gold Belt, in their opinion, is consistent with the PPS because it protects agricultural land. Respectfully, we would just ask how staff can make this determination without having any corresponding policies or further information to properly understand how it's going to be applied in the official plan. So in conclusion, we would ask that the committee consider whether they feel they have enough information plus advance notice to take a position on the establishment of the Gold Belt in the official plan. If the creation of the Gold Belt proceeds, we would request that the city meaningfully consult the aggregate industry, given the potential impact that it will have on significant resource areas. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity to provide comments, and I'd be happy to answer any of the committee's questions. Thank you.
So I was just myself going to ask you, do you recall seeing the word countryside in the official plan report?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we did see the countryside
So
designation.
Just so you know, Neil, Gold Belt is just another name for countryside. That's it. Nothing else. That's it. Countryside equals Gold Belt. It just was thought by the sponsor group that myself probably took the lead on it, that in a city that has a green belt, to have something called Gold Belt that is the same as the countryside, it's just a better word. However, I can tell you that we've had many discussions with Don Herwire and his team, and I know I was speaking to Rod Price and Rod Pierce on Friday, and they too have met with him, and there's time for any of your questions between now and June when this comes back. But there's not any plan to change anything. What you know as countryside is Gold Belt. And that's it. It's that simple. Anyone else have any questions? Anyway, I know that you're going to have time with staff between now and June. And if you have any other questions, come on back and see us then. But thank you very much for coming out today.
Thank you, Chair Harder.
Thank you. Next up, and you're here, Michelle.
I'm here.
I was ready to call you again and again and again. So welcome. You have 5 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Appreciate everything you guys are doing here, Mrs. Chair. I'm talking specifically today about a piece of property on Fernbank Road, Category 2. It's S6, S7. It's basically stuck beside the piece that Neil Malhotra spoke of and John Riddle. Again, we have purchased a piece of property, cash for trash, wanting to remove them from there so that we don't presently, the piece of property right now is zoned rural industrial. We do not want to kind of have a pile of trash in the back of the neighborhood where Westridge and those beautiful walking trails are. Also, when I look at this detailed mapping that the city's put out, our property scores 35, 36, not in the green, in the gray, and the property next to us scores 38. It's in the green. I see discrepancies on this report that I looked through. We were told that there wouldn't be any agricultural brought in the boundary. There's 309 hectares of agricultural land, some of it yellow pass, some of it green pass in Orleans, scoring 21 to 29, less than our piece of property. It's not agricultural. If I look at Rideau Road South, you got 106 hectares south of Rideau Road. That's Green Pass 1824. I'm looking at this and I'm asking myself, am I reading this right? Then when I look at Rideau Road or Riverside South, the airport authority has 31 hectares of land there that can never be developed, and it's in the yellow pass. Can't put houses there for the planes. I'm just going through certain parts and just wondering where we're at with this. I know back in May, I had a long discussion with planning about Canada North, asking them, is any land coming in Canada North? They specifically told me, no, you haven't developed the last piece you brought in on the last go around. All and behold, there's 175 hectares that were brought in. I mean, I'm not asking, I'm not saying that this is right or wrong. I just look at the discrepancies on the scoring. I look at our piece of property on Fernbank, like John Riddle explained a while ago with the services and everything. It should be scored in and it's not. And I just need somebody to have a look at this and score it properly. I'm just blown away about how much agricultural land is coming in Orleans when we're not supposed to be bringing any in. But again, I appreciate you guys giving me the time to speak and explain myself. And thank you again for listening.
Thank you, Michelle. And I believe Councillor Moffat has a question for you. Just hold on. Councillor Moffat.
Thanks. It's just a point of clarification, just to make sure that we understand fully what lands we're considering. The lands in question in Orleans, in South Orleans, the Wall Road lands, those were those were previously designated agricultural. There was a zoning amendment, an official plan amendment to have that changed. Council actually voted against that, but it went to the OMB. The OMB sided with the landowners. That land has since been redesignated as general rural lands. So for the purposes of this evaluation, those are not agricultural lands.
Okay, well, on your report, they're still marked as agricultural. And if they are rural, like you say, still scoring way lower than what our piece of land on Fernbank is scored.
If you want to, Michelle, if you want to submit, I mean, it's hard for us to sit here and go through scores and back and forth with staff.
Yeah.
If you want to submit an email to me, obviously you've reached out to me before about different things. So if you want to submit an email to me, I'm happy to evaluate that with staff and get back to you with a response.
Thank you. I'll do that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moffat. And I see no other question. Thank you very much, Michelle. Merci beaucoup. Next speaker is Salma Al-Shahabi. Salma, are you on?
Hi, just give me 1 second. I'm trying to do my logistics here.
Selma's being joined by Professor Lee.
Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you, yes. Okay. And also, I believe Professor Lee with you.
I'm not sure if he already joined us or not, but I have just shared in the information with him, so he might be coming in any minute. Just give me 1 second, please. Okay. Thank you very much for all your hard work in the city. I have to say that you have a very long day and a very important decision to make today. I'm hoping to get this all sorted out. Okay. Shall we start?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Salma Al-Shahabi. I'm a resident in the city of Ottawa for the past more than 2 decades now. And I'm here to talk about this growth plan that you have today. I'm going to start first by asking you, if I say the 1961 Ferrari GT, DXT, what does that term really mean to you? Or what do you think of when you hear that? I'm probably going to be saying, you're thinking, well, for some of you, and I did look at some of you, it might be childhood memories. It might be a dream for some others. And for most, it's probably viewed as an extremely expensive, unaffordable classic car. So this is one example of a good that is limited in supply and that is most desired in the world, with an estimated value now at about 16, 18 million US dollars. But what does that have to do with the gold belt? Well, this is what lands in Ottawa will be if we approve the proposed gold belt. The lands will be limited in supply. They're most desired. The person with the highest bid will win. And this makes the land increasingly, unrealistically, unaffordable. This is why I'm asking you to reconsider and not approve going ahead with the gold belt today. I see it as negatively affecting the sustainability, the long-term housing affordability, and I see it as bringing a social and economical catastrophe to the city if we are to approve it. Controlling the supply now is not the solution, and we have to look at what is the solution. The city should leave the city boundaries alone for good. And this is not that I'm encouraging spur. I'm not saying we should just let developers develop everywhere, but by leaving the city land unlimited and to properly address the supply barriers of housing within our developed communities now, this would be the solution to what we have as a problem. If we do it now, we will be protecting our city's long-term housing affordability. We'll ensure our children have an opportunity to reach their full potential. We will reach our intensification targets and mitigate our environmental footprint. NIMBYism has taken over our city for far too long, and it's time for all of us concerned about the environment, concerned about affordability, or the future of our children, rural and agricultural lands. We should all stand together against NIMBYism. We should support developers as they propose development plans in the built-up area. We need to have more people show up at planning committees to fight against NIMBYism and help councillors vote against it. And there are other measures, but this is the number one reason why we are here. And to say that we are going to be preventing the next 3, 4, 5 generations from making a decision in the city is not right. They are our children, and we have to give them the chance to make these decisions. We can't just do it now for them. And I hope that you will accept this recommendation for you. I don't know if Mr. Lee? He's on mute.
You need to
There he is.
Thank you. Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you very much. I've got a very brief time to speak. I realize I only just learned of this opportunity this morning, and I was in class for 3 hours. I strongly agree with what Selma's saying. I don't consult anybody. I have nothing to do with the development industry. I don't have investments in any of this. I'm paid by one person, one organization in this world, and it's called Carleton University, and they certainly don't tell me what to think. So I'm certainly not in the pocket of developers. In fact, I took on developers in the Lansdowne Park 10 years ago. I'm not afraid of taking on billionaires or multimillionaires. This proposal is appalling. It is an assault on our young people and immigrants coming to Canada. I have a house in the glebe. I am living fat. I'm doing just fine, thank you very much. This is not an assault on me. This is an assault on young people and their opportunities and new Canadians. Stats Canada shows the data is very clear. All population growth in the future going forward is going to come from immigration. This is preventing immigrants from coming to Canada and integrating in the suburbs where the cheapest, the least expensive, most affordable housing is located. We have done a brilliant job for 50, 60, 70 years in integrating our immigrants, unlike the Europeans who've done such an appalling job. Okay, what this is designed to do is look after privileged people like me, reduce the supply, drive up the housing prices of us people in the core and the urban core and the glebe, Westboro, and this is selfish. This is selfish. This is not looking after the needs of the future of young people and immigrants. In fact, let me go further and I'll close. You know, for this last year and a half with the whole discussion around Black Lives Matter and minorities, there's been a great debate around structural racism. And people said, well, what is that? And I was one of them. What is this? Well, it's the policies that embed in our government policies and our practices that hurt people who are minorities. This policy will fall disproportionately on minorities. This is a form, unwitting, I'm not accusing anybody of being a racist. This is unwitting structural racism. It's going to hurt immigrants. It's going to hurt minorities. It's going to hurt young people. And it is absolutely wrong. Thank you.
Councillor Moffat has a question for you or both.
Whoever wants to answer it. So the proposal in front of us is about 1,000 hectares of new land. And then to look further at 270 hectares. And then the imposition of a map, a drawn map with some colors on it that we call a gold belt that changes nothing in the grand scheme of things, except for a map that puts color to already existing designations. Between the urban boundary and the gold belt, which again, already designated, there's about 8,000 hectares of land for future growth. Are you suggesting that in addition to the 1,000 hectares we're including, that the upwards of 8,000 hectares is not enough?
I'm not saying they're not enough. I'm just saying that when you are saying we're limiting the supply, you're basically going to make competition happen fiercely between developers and those who can own these lands. This competition is going to drive the prices way up, and that cost is going to be passed on to the homeowners and to the tenants who are going to be living on in these houses and in those developments. That's what I'm saying. We're not saying it's not sufficient land. We're just saying we should be leaving the supply unlimited so that there is no fierce competition happening over the price of each parcel. Instead, we should be facing NIMBYism. The way I see this golden belt.
Okay, just stop you there on the NIMBYism stuff. NIMBYism has never won the day at Planning Committee. So let's just stop right there. It's never won the day. They all come out to us, they oppose development, we approve it anyways, and then we get shit on. So let's just be clear that NIMBYism does not win the day. So we don't have to worry about that. That's it. I just want to know that.
All right. Thank you very much.
Just before we go.
I don't know if Mr. Lee wants to add anything else.
If you want, I can respond very quickly to Scott. I've lived here all my life. And
Jan, can you unmute your microphone, please?
Okay.
Yeah. Chair El Shantiri has a question for you, Professor Lee.
Do you agree we need to protect our food resources? Yes or no?
Of course we do. We're the second largest country in the world. Of course we do.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you both for coming out today. And well, thank you, Professor Lee, for being a surprise guest because we didn't have you on the original list. So thanks very much.
Councillor Meehan.
Councillor Meehan.
Councillor Meehan, go ahead. Sorry.
I guess just a question to Salma or Professor Lee. I understand your arguments, but at the same time, the more that we allow more land to be developed on, the cost to all of us increases. We have to service land. We have to provide transit and new schools and parks and everything. Where does that fit in? For what you're saying?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
There's a fundamental conflict that none of you want to address, and it's real in our country. We're the second largest landmass on planet Earth. We all know that. That isn't the issue. Our country is only going to grow if we have immigration. We're built on immigration. All growth and future is going to come from immigration. There is a fundamental conflict between the growth restrictions and our commitment to immigration. And to say that we don't have enough land is, we all know that's demagogic nonsense. The United States is a smaller landmass than Canada, and they've got 330 million people in the United States. We have 38 million, smaller than the state of California, in the second largest landmass. So to suggest that we're running out of land or that we have to restrict it to save the agriculture is just nonsense. Okay,
Well,
and I've got the stats. I didn't have time to bring them. I've got agriculture stats from Stats Canada to show you.
All right, all right, thank you, thank you. Now you see, okay. We're losing track of why we're here now, okay? And just because we're getting a little bit excited, more people are getting interested and are asking questions. And you're not asking questions, you're asking questions to rebut. And that's not what we're here to do. We're here to listen today, okay? And they have their opinion, we have ours, okay? And people that live elsewhere in the city, and whether you live, if you are representing suburbia, it's very different than Councillor Leeper's ward. It's very different than Councillor Menard's ward. It's very different than Councillor Moffat's ward. It's just different. And that's one of the great things we have in this city. And we have a very healthy, multicultural city. And our growth is definitely in those new Canadians coming here. And most of them are moving to the burbs. And I thank them every day. So does anyone else really want to ask a question? Councillor Hubley?
Thank
We can't hear him. He's mute.
You're on mute, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to ask a question, if I may. I'll be brief with. I want to thank the both people for coming in to present, but I can't miss up this opportunity to ask Dr. Lee a question. I do value his opinion on a lot of issues to do with our city. One of the discussions we're hearing in this plan that's being presented, and we're hearing a lot about, is these 15-minute neighborhoods. I'm not convinced that we can do that even with bringing in these lands because of the existing neighborhoods for various reasons, such as you're not going to get a Loblaws to open in the middle of every neighborhood. I'd like if you could give us a very brief answer to stay on the good side of the chair here, but I'd like to get your thoughts on the 18-hour city model that I think is much more achievable for our city.
I have had the great fortune, because my father came from Europe. I have a European passport, even though I've grown up and lived in Canada all my life. I've been all over to most of the European countries. And these assumptions behind progressives who make the argument for the 15-minute neighborhood are based on models from Europe, where the densities range, and I've looked them up by country, from 250 people per square kilometer to 550 people per square kilometer. Canada has the lowest density on planet Earth at 4 per square kilometer. Yes, I know there's a lot of wasted land up north, meaning there aren't people there. Even when you take that out, we have one of the lowest densities. We are strung out because that's the nature of the development of our country. So my point being that the 15-minute neighborhood, I don't think is workable. It's not that I'm against it. I mean, ironically, I practice it because I rarely leave where I live because I'm older and I'm isolating and all that stuff. But I don't think it's practical for most people in the suburbs. You know, the soccer club or field is 3 kilometers that way, and the hockey arena is 5 kilometers that way, and the Loblaws is 7 kilometers that way. That's just the nature of being the second largest country in the world. And so it's a pipe dream. It's a dream of trying to import the European model into Canada. And we're not Europe.
So, but Dr. Lee, sorry, one follow-up, Madam Chair. I asked to get your thoughts on the 18-hour city, and I didn't hear you mention that. The 18-hour city would be better because it means all those things that you listed, you would be connected to it, most likely by transit or by a pathway that you could cycle or walk on.
I understand it, and I applaud the effort, but I don't think we're being realistic in the sense of 2 things. We can't, the transit works best as the hub and spoke model. You bring everybody into the downtown. Mass transit is not good for running across the burbs, I call it. Running from the west side of Canada to the east side, or running from, it just isn't built like that. And the second thing is about the pathways, is we continuously neglect World Bank data. Canada is the second coldest country on the planet Earth after Russia. Mean average winter temperature. All you have to do, don't listen to me, Go out and look at the bicycle paths in the winter and see how many millions of bicycles are running down the street in the bike paths. You know the answer. I know the answer. It's just too cold. It's not workable.
I cannot believe you're from the glebe and saying that. It's just music to my ears, because that's exactly what we witness. And listen, everybody, we're getting so off a topic. You know what?
No, that's it,
Professor Lee,
Madam Chair. I got the answer I wanted. Thank you.
Professor Lee, it would be a pleasure to have you come and make a special presentation. I have a longtime follower, very interested in what you have to say, whether I agree with you or not. It would be great for you to, if you're interested, we could put together a special a Zoom event that I'm sure lots of people, more than just counselors, would sign on to. It would be, maybe we'll get a couple of people to go back and forth with you, and it would be fun and interesting.
I would like to, and I promise you, it'll be supported with evidence-based data. And I mean from that, not lobbyists, from government agencies called the European Statistical Agency, Stats Canada. I only source from OECD government organizations.
Well, we appreciate that. So thank you very much for coming out, and both of you, and we'll go on to our next person.
Oh, you get Friday. Thank you.
So we have up next, then I'll read 5 because we've probably lost track. John B. Cooper is next, followed by Daniel Buckles, followed by Bronwyn Anderson, Jim Bergout, and Kevin Yen. So first up is John B. Cooper.
Good afternoon, councillors. Please confirm that you can see and hear me and that slide 1 is up.
Well, not yet, because we can't see you. We can hear you. Well, when the slide goes up, we won't be able to see you, but just hang on a minute and that'll happen. Hang on. There we can. The slide's up now.
Thank you.
Go ahead whenever you're ready.
My name is John Cooper and I have lived at 1245 Old Second Line Road most of my life. I appreciate the opportunity to provide comments on what is overall an excellent draft plan. I will be brief as I have provided a more detailed written submission for your consideration. Slide 2, please. My comments concern my property and surrounding land owned by Richcraft, as shown here, that have been grouped by the city as part of the Category 3 potential new community. These lands are zoned RU and are kitty corner to the existing urban boundary. I will refer to these lands as the Cooper Coal or CC lands, reflecting historical ownership. My wife and I are the only residents on this land. Slide 3, please. The point I wish to make is the CC land should be appropriately grouped with Category 1 South March Cluster rather than the Category 3 potential new community land. There are 3 reasons for this regrouping: inaccurate land grouping and scoring of service costs, illogical delineation of urban boundary, and the need to follow through with past planning decisions. Slide 4, please. I agree the CC land scores the same as the South March cluster in all aspects except serviceability. The CC land is close to jobs, transit, retail, and recreation facilities. Even with today's public transit system, it is only a 12-minute walk for me to catch an express bus going downtown to my work at National Defense. There's good access to 417 along the old second line in Terry Fox in addition to March Road. These lands are superbly located to provide a 15-minute neighborhood for many more people than just my wife and I. Slide 5, please. The serviceability scoring of the CC land is negatively affected by grouping them with lands 2 kilometers away. Water supply upgrades will be required to service South March cluster lands, and the same upgrade to the Morgan's Grant water pump required to service SM9B will also provide water to CC lands. Contrary to previous comments, this land is not agricultural land. It is rocky and it will present some servicing challenges. Wastewater upgrades required to service the South March cluster are the same upgrades required to service the CC lands. Existing erosion problems in Charity's Brook would be mitigated by the addition of a stormwater management pond on these lands as recommended by engineers reporting to Richcraft. I would like to meet with staff to review scoring to understand why, for example, the CC land was scored -1 for active agricultural operation when there is no agriculture here. If you properly group the CC land with the South March cluster, it permits holistic planning of services for these lands. Slide 6. The second reason to include the CC land with the South March cluster is to create a logical urban boundary. Using the old second line road as the boundary creates an isolated parcel of land surrounded on 3 sides by Gold Belt and rural residential. A more logical delineation would be to follow the inner boundary of the Gold Belt as shown. I'd like to emphasize some new information that I did not include with my written submission. This grouping is not a new idea. The last time the urban boundary was considered by the city in 2009, the CC lands were grouped together as an integrated part of Area 1 called the North of Canada Urban Area, exactly as I am recommending today. My final point. For years, these lands have been appropriately zoned to keep them available for future urban growth. Good urban planning in the past has protected these lands in readiness for today's expansion needs. Now is the right time to include these lands. Slide 8, please. In conclusion, the Cole Cooper land should be added to the South March cluster to holistically plan for services which will ultimately be required to develop SM9B and the CC land, to create a logical urban boundary, and to follow through with past planning decisions. I respectfully request this committee revise the draft official plan to include the Cole Cooper land in the South March Category 1 lands. Thank you. And are there any questions?
I don't know, but I'm going to look at my list here. Mr. Cooper, I don't see anyone waving their hands, but thank you very much. And we'll certainly take the time to, if we haven't reviewed your submission entirely, we will. Thanks very much.
Thank you and have a good day.
You too. Next up is Daniel Buckles. Daniel's followed by Bronwyn Anderson, Jim Burgout, Kevin Young. Daniel, are you here? Oh, I see you. There you are. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you and good afternoon, councillors. I live in Kitchissippi Ward, represented by Councillor Leeper. Maybe you could tell that already from the beard. I'm the chair of the Environment Committee of the Champlain Park Community Association, an active member of cafes, and a member of the board of the Green Space Alliance. Today, I'm speaking as a member of an alliance of environmental and social justice organizations called the People's Official Plan for Ottawa's Climate Emergency. I wish to make one point only for consideration by council and staff. Along with others, I support the concept of protecting rural lands through a mechanism such as the Gold Belt. As you've already heard and seen in the report, the map of the proposed Gold Belt shows that the belt does not actually encircle the new urban boundary like a belt. In fact, it's more like a very loosely fitted sash. In many places, the Gold Belt does not touch or even get close to the periphery of the existing or the proposed urban boundary. This worries me, particularly for the large pockets of lands in the Leitrim East and Carlsbad West area, where the current urban boundary is also the edge of the Greenbelt. It creates a big pocket where two of the three options being considered today could get approved soon as part of the 270 hectare discussion. The same concern exists for several large pockets around the South March Highlands that are not within the proposed urban boundary and yet not in the proposed Gold Belt either. We just heard about one such small parcel. The Gold Belt leaves these areas in limbo between two fire breaks against urban expansion in the future. The outer edge of the Gold Belt may separate the urban area from villages, as Councillor Chantilly had suggested, but the inner edge leaves a lot of rural and forested land available as potential greenfields for development. What worries me is that the ambiguity of their status may lead to land speculation and pressure on a future council to bring them into the urban boundary. So it may not be feasible to bring the Gold Belt up perfectly to the new urban boundary everywhere. However, the plan could do more to protect at least some of these large pockets of land, especially where they touch the greenbelt or other core natural areas. Fortunately, the draft official plan has a policy that could do that. In the section on citywide policies, the draft official plan introduces the possibility of designating natural linkage areas to provide connections between core natural areas like the greenbelt and the broader regional natural landscape. According to the official plan definition, natural linkage areas include rural and agricultural lands and support lands in other designations as well. Designation as natural linkage areas signals that the city intends to maintain them in a rural or natural condition in the long term. In short, my suggestion is that the city use the policy of natural linkage areas proactively to create corridors and connections between the new urban boundary and the Gold Belt, especially where they connect to existing green space such as the Green Belt. This would fine-tune the Gold Belt proposal and might tighten up the belt enough to ensure that near urban green space, forested lands, and wildlife corridors not included in the Gold Belt are better protected from future urban expansion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And your counselor, also with the beard, has a question for you. Counselor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. Daniel Greatbeard. Has the FCA had any discussion with city staff to this point about the Gold Belt and what you might expect in terms of consultations on that moving forward?
I can't speak for the FCA, but community associations that I'm, the Champlain Park Community Association, cafes as well that I'm part of, and the broader People's Official Plan Initiative have not, as far as I know, been consulted on the Gold Belt to date. It's been a 1 week period, I guess, like everyone else, where we've heard about the belt and had the opportunity to look at the document. So it's been a bit of a rush, considering as well that the deadline for consultations on the official plan draft is just around the corner as well. So it's a lot to put on community groups to weigh in on. And as far as I know, we haven't been formally consulted.
Well, I'll be keeping my eye on that and asking staff to make sure that the consultations around which parcels are in the Gold Belt and which are not, et cetera, is not just a discussion between the development industry, but includes some citizen participation as well.
That's great.
Thank you for a good presentation today. It made a lot eminent sense.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out today. Our next speaker is Bronwyn Anderson, Vice President, Land Development, Minto Communities. Hi, Bronwyn.
Hi, how are you doing? So good afternoon, Madam and Mr. Chair and Committee. So I'm here on behalf of Minto Communities, and thank you for your time and consideration today. And another thank you to the City of Ottawa staff for their time and effort to complete a comprehensive analysis for the urban expansion in the City of Ottawa. After reviewing the report, we did want to express our support for many of the recommendations that are within the report. Originally, one of the other items we wanted to speak to today was to express some concerns that we had with the proposed Gold Belt. However, I've been available and watching the committee meeting and the discussions that have occurred over the last few hours, and that what we would like to instead ask for is just clarification on what the change would be to what's existing right now to what will happen if the Gold Belt is implemented, because I believe we just don't fully understand what the implications would be, and there's a couple of unknowns, so we just respectfully request some additional information and understanding of this before it moves forward. So on that note, thank you for your time, and I wanted to keep it short and sweet, so if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know.
I have a question for
Councillor Chair El Shantiri has a question, Bronwyn. Hang on.
Sorry, Councillor, I believe you're on mute.
Okay, now on me. Okay, thank you, Ms. Anderson, for your presentation, but I think it's Councillor Harder's fault all along because it was called Countryside, and then she said, let's have a name so the resident can adjust to it. We have the green belt in Ottawa. We can call this the gold belt, and it seems to create more confusion than creating really transparency, because that's the whole idea, is to protect the agricultural land around the city and the natural feature and the natural resource land. But I'm not sure if it's the name the problem. Maybe we should go back and call it Countryside.
Thank you for that explanation. That is certainly helpful.
Okay, thank you.
And we aren't going back to calling it Countryside.
Okay, so we have Jim.
No, we'll go, anyway, we'll have that discussion later. Councillor Dudas has a question for Ms. Anderson. Councillor Dudas?
Yes, I just wanted to point out, Bronwyn, if you weren't available earlier, that I do have a direction that's coming forward to staff to ask them for those pieces of clarification and really to kind of flesh out what it was intended. I think the intent of the Gold Belt is incredibly valid. It's going to protect some of the lands that we do need to protect, but there's some questions about how it's going to be implemented, what it actually means, not just for developers, but also for residents, for community associations. We just heard the previous delegation. So in that respect, looking at the timelines, looking at designations, would that meet the needs for your quest for information?
Yes, so yeah, we'll certainly look forward to what you'll bring forward later on. We'll keep watching and see what additional information is provided. Thank you for that.
So just for clarification, we're going to be coming back after the delegations are finished. Tomorrow we'll come back at noon and we'll put the motions, directions, etc. on the table at that point. We will ask questions of staff. We will do our debating. And so that will be before us tomorrow. And I think staff are listening as well. So they'll be prepared to speak to whether or not a direction is needed and what the nuances and differences are, if any, between Countryside and Gold Belt in this whole report. So thank you. Thanks, Bronwyn. Nice seeing you.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Jim Burgo. Jim, hello. How are you? Haven't seen you in a while.
I'm fine, thank you very much. Good afternoon, members of committee and both chairs. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Claridge Homes group of companies, and unfortunately, I find myself having to be somewhat critical of the way this report is set up. With it's set up so the council approves an expansion map for inclusion into an official circulation, and the lands that are excluded would essentially be out of luck. This means that the consultation period for those excluded lands would be effectively a week. We, like many others, made individual submissions with engineering solutions on several properties over the last few months, and all we ever got back was a message saying, "Thank you, received." There were no questions, no comments, no discourse, and no dialogue. Until this report was released, we had absolutely no idea how they would be scored. With only a few days to question the findings, that is not really effective consultation. As a comparison to the last time that this exercise was done in 2009, there were several iterations of a scoring table, many opportunities to meet with staff and discuss the merits and drawbacks of each and every parcel. And this process of proper consultation was over several months, not days. Also very surprising is the recommendation to establish the Gold Belt, simply because it's completely unnecessary. Mr. Mikael has confirmed this morning that all of these lands are already given guidance and protection under the various current and proposed policies. So I'm interested in where this is going, because any additional policies are just going to encumber individual private landowners who are completely unaware of what is happening, because developers can't go there now anyway. Now, with respect to the actual evaluations of the parcels, the approved guidelines and methodology were not strictly followed, but they were rather interpreted. Now, we have absolutely no problem with the Pass 1 lands, those that are shown in yellow on the maps, because these are the most deserving and obvious parcels for inclusion, so these should be approved right away. Especially in Canada North, where as a member of Canada North Landowners Group, we would be delighted to have more land mass to help us develop the infrastructure that is needed the 10-year wait that was referenced this morning has nothing to do with a lack of demand up in that area. It has everything to do with trying to get infrastructure approved. And I'm happy to report that significant infrastructure, about $20 million worth, is about to start on March Road, being front-ended by those landowners. However, the staff assessment, especially for servicing, was harsh and inconsistent from the published criteria, and this ended up preventing some parcels from being Pass 1, and Neil Malhotra talked about that earlier, because they didn't meet the minimum threshold of 14 for servicing. Now, this is really important because even though staff told us that they were consistently applied across the city, the fact that they scored lower than the published criteria had the effect of artificially limiting the number of Pass 1 sites, which of course gave staff the discretion to manipulate the Pass 2 recommendations. Now, one might think that a few points shouldn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. After all, we have 16, I guess. One penalty was added somehow along the way. Staff's approach was that if you didn't make the Pass 1 cut, then they had discretion for all of the remaining lands. Can someone tell us why we have all of those criteria then when they have been effectively ignored by staff? As an example, staff recommended about 10 parcels scoring between 17 and 25, and they have said no to parcels scoring 35 to 41. This subjective discretion to pick and choose only begs the question of whether just and fair consideration was given based on all of the council approved criteria or just a few of them. As part of a fair and reasonable solution, our suggestion is that you approve the Pass 1 lands that are shown in yellow on the map. Then direct staff to use the overall holistic score using all of the criteria and rank the remaining lands and recommend them in order based on overall merit. This is precisely what was done in the previous expansion, and it was deemed appropriate, fair, and reasonable by all the parties, including the Ontario Municipal Board. The lands under consideration are certainly viable and sufficient enough to meet the full land budget of 1,280 hectares. There would then be no need to have the first of the three scenarios presented in recommendation 5 to fill the unused balance. But the notion of further study and a report in 5 years to talk about a well-researched viable option for future expansion needs, that makes perfect sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim, and I don't see any question for you. We go to the next presenter, and that's Kevin Yam. Kevin, are you on board? Here's Kevin.
Who's after Kevin?
And after Kevin, we have Martin J. Hoschard. Kevin, time's yours.
Yes. Hey, Melody, I was just going to ask if you could hold off on the presentation just while I do introductions. Thank you, first of all, Chairs Harder and Elshintiri, and Vice Chairs, Councillors, for the opportunity to speak to this report. Thank you to Mr. Steve Willis and city staff. Clearly, the effort level, study, research put into the report is on a grand scale. No doubt in my mind about that. On behalf of Ridgecraft, I want to use my time today just to speak to a few of the items that I think require some additional consideration. The first item is in line with what some of my colleagues today, just saying that the turnaround time that we've been afforded here was what I would say inadequate. In the future, I think we need to have a little bit more time in this step in the process, extend it a little bit so that owners can fully assess the impacts of this report. That's a lot of pages coming out on a Friday night. And then the next Friday, you've got to get your submission in with your critique. So there is a lot of work to be done in those areas. So I suggest we make that step a little bit bigger, a little bit longer, give people more of an opportunity. My second point is in regards to the countryside, formerly known as the Gold Belt. This recommendation number 1, I was quite surprised to read about it. And I haven't really seen any research other than I think just the current designation in the OP. So we kind of just took the paintbrush from the OP. It's like Mr. Miguel has said this morning, there isn't really a big change in policy implications, and I didn't see any research. This first point of the rationale in the report talks about how this countryside will direct development away from natural areas. I disagree. I think you're specifically targeting natural areas. I think AG is a man-made thing. It is not a natural thing. I'm not saying it's not important. I like to eat food every day as well. So I find that rationale to be a little bit strange. I think we need to focus on efficient use of infrastructure, particularly with the enormous sanitary sewer, higher order transit costs. I think we need to clarify, and Ms. Anderson from Minto was saying the same thing, and I agree with her. I think we need to do a little bit more research, find out, are we farming RU lands? Are trees growing on ag lands? Are we setting ourselves up for leapfrogging yet again? Is Carlton Place and Rockland, are they going to send us a thank you card because now they can have that many more residents interested in coming? So Melody, can you put the slides up for me? And I'll try to stay brief with these as well. Next slide. Okay, here I just lost my notes. So this first slide is page 38 on document 2, as you can see. And what I wanted to point out here is that we have a planned BRT and an actual BRT station planned, and that's going right through a current farm field, agricultural lands. But I mean, are we then not going to consider these for expansion in the future for, you know, until the turn of the century because we're trying to save this type of land? Or are we going to assess and take a look at these lands individually in the future to see what kind of impact it's going to have on city infrastructure and private and public infrastructure? I think it's a pretty unique example on the plan. And as you can see, you know, it's right there with transit. I know that it's not recommended on any of the categories, but I like staff to consider this as something to look at in the future when they're starting to look at how we can implement a countryside, but also still use our infrastructure wisely. Can you go to the next slide, please, Melody? This is just a little bit of the same thing, give you an idea of where Millennium Park is and where these lands are. And that's exactly where the planned BRT is supposed to go with the state. I've actually seen the station drawings, so I know they're out there. Next slide, please. Next one. These lands are in the Riverside South area. Mr. Chown and Mr. Denham have already represented in this general area. And in my May submission and moving forward with Richcraft, we insist that this area of the city is the most economical, and it is the next logical step to complete the Riverside South master planned community.
Thank you, Kevin. Do we have any questions? Let me see. No, I'm not seeing any. Thank you. I do have your submission. Thanks for coming out today.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Martin Hochschild, followed by Gail White and Sam Hirsch, Greg Winters, and Ursula Mellons. So, is Martin here?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, councillors, staff, thank you very much for inviting me this afternoon. My family owns a farm on Fernbank Road that is bounded by Fernbank Road, Shea Road, and Terry Fox. And when I was a boy, we used to ride our horses up and down what is now Fernbank Road. It was the 10th line then. We'd get our cattle back after they'd get out of the fence, in what is now the Fernbank Estate subdivision across the road. We trundled our tractors up and down the road. And now we can't do those things any longer. And what's happened over time is that we could produce food, and now we can't because there's a conflict between the rural and the urban transportation corridor. We can't ride our horses, we can't drive our tractors, we can't make effective use of the land any longer. Our use and enjoyment of the land has declined. We can't use the roadways as we did previously. And we can't make effective use of the property any longer as an agricultural property. And so I think as you deliberate how you intend to implement a policy around the countryside, that it's critical that you have a separation between rural roads and urban development. Otherwise, other farmers will find themselves in the same predicament as we are in today. Our property, as I say, fronts on Fernbank Road, and our property is not within the development plan currently, even though there is going to be a transportation hub immediately across the road. There's a park and ride, and there are other facilities, infrastructure facilities such as water, wastewater, and so forth. So it's a bit of a waste that other areas will be developed when this area will not be. I recognize fully that agricultural lands are ranked as they are, but from time to time one runs into instances where agricultural lands can no longer be operated as they were formerly, simply because of the circumstances. So I would seriously recommend that council carefully deliberate how separation can be achieved in transportation corridors so that others don't find themselves in the same predicament as we are. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks, and thank you once again for allowing me to speak this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Martin. I don't see anyone with questions, but thank you for coming out today. Gail, I see you there. You are up next and you have 5 minutes, ma'am.
All right, thank you very much, Chairman Carter and Chairman Mikalski. I am coming to this meeting as a small investor in this massive plan, and I'm looking at the South March cluster. I'm a resident in that South March cluster, of which there are 5 estate lots. It would sound and look like those are an insignificant portion in that land area. However, there are 123 2-acre estate lots, which comprise 246 acres, which equates to 100 hectares. So that's over 50% of that land mass has already actually been developed as rural estate lots. In addition, there was great effort with that Granada North expansion to have transition zones between the urban boundary and the rural estate lots, of which great effort was taken to recognize that there is a difference between those 2 communities. So I would ask that that be reconsidered, that this is not vacant land. This is 57% of developed land. And if we're looking for urban density, won't be able to be achieved. However, once those estate lots are now designated as urban, developers can come in and scoop them up. But now we're dealing with individual landowners having to deal with those challenges. And certainly on my title deed, I have covenants on my title saying, I can't have my land developed. I can't even build a fence. I'm not sure what the other 5 communities have on title for their lands, but that would be a significant problem for each and every one of us. Questions?
Thank you very much, Gail, and thank you to you and John for your submission. We had the submission from John as well, but I just want to say thank you for taking the time to be here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the planners and the committee meetings for all your efforts. This is a great undertaking. Thank you.
So our next speaker, I don't see any question for Gail. Thank you, Gail. Our next speaker is Sam Hirsch from Horizon Ottawa. Sam?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful.
Bonjour aux membres du comité joint. Avant que je commence, je voulais
Before
reconnaître.
beginning, I'd like to recognize that we're on the Algonquin people territory who is completely excluded from any consultation in this regard. Today, on behalf of Horizon Ottawa, we are in favor of fairer, greener municipal council, and we would like to have a municipal council which would work for the interest of the people and people who have the courage to submit recommendations.
Last time I spoke here in May of 2020 to the subject of I was not given the same respect as other speakers were. After my speaking time, I was promptly asked who my employer was and dismissed as someone whose intervention was of little worth. I hope that today, at the end of my time, I will be given the same respect that all residents who speak at public meetings deserve. There's a double standard here at work. When folks like myself come and speak about the perception of developer influence or the perils of sprawl and about the fact that we must develop our city differently in a way that takes into account the needs of residents and the impact of intensification, we're classified as radical, reckless, and unrealistic. But do you know what is really reckless? It's calling for an extension of the urban boundary in the midst of a climate emergency that we ourselves declared. It's allowing developers to run roughshod over the city in the midst of a housing crisis, and it's providing developers with millions of subsidies in brownfield grants when hundreds are sleeping on the street every night. I'm here today because Horizon Ottawa and countless others in this city are quite frankly concerned about this report that was released at 5 p.m. on a Friday night, mind you. Further, it was quite disingenuous and leading to see quotes in a press release from the chairs of both committees and Mayor Watson praising the report. As chairs of these meetings, and thus as arbiters of this incredibly important discussion, these members of council should focus on facilitating deliberation on the report after hearing from public delegations rather than providing PR for it before the public has even weighed in. This report, as well as the decision around the boundary in May, has constantly been referred to by senior staff and councillors who supported it as balanced and measured. Both terms mentioned more than a dozen times in this report. But there is little balance or measured about this plan. The plan is one that encourages decades more of outward sprawl, and in fact seems to encourage further future councils to once again expand the urban boundary to the proposed gold belt for years to come, in addition to bringing more land within today's boundary for development. While we of course don't oppose it, the proposal of this new gold belt is nothing more than an excuse for the city's poor policymaking and the majority of city council's bad decision making, most of whom have taken campaign donations from the development industry who have huge stakes in this decision. If staff don't think the green belt stopped unhinged development, what makes them think a gold belt or a red belt or a purple belt will? Continuing to expand and ascribe a new color to each new belt may make for a very vibrant map, but it's not sound planning or public policy. The solution to all of our urban problems cannot continue to be to give developers more land and space to develop and profit from. Sure, developers are hungry for more profit to be extracted from rising property values, and Ottawa's planners appear to be happy to facilitate ever-growing property values through upzoning and urban boundary expansion. But property values cannot go up forever without displacing thousands of residents and businesses who cannot afford increasingly expensive real estate and rent. As long as we continue to plan our city within the confines of outward expansion, we cannot reach the goal of having 15-minute neighborhoods, which this committee makes constant reference to. And I'm sure that members here know that very well. They know that now, and they knew it when we were debating the expansion of the urban boundary. This is not a debate that can be squeezed into an urban-rural-suburban divide, but rather it's a debate between those wanting sustainable development versus never-ending growth, and between those who want to build a city simply for corporate developers to invest in versus those who want to build a city for people to live in. And you can tell which side many members of this committee might fit into, many of whom have accepted over 50% of their donations from the development industry. Finally, a report like this does not reflect the needs of future residents. Although it mentioned years as late as the 2040s, it's short-sighted and will only have negative effects on the future generations by putting our environment at risk and exacerbating the housing crisis. Just because you say or write the words 15-minute neighborhood doesn't automatically make it so. The true path to this is a city plan for and by residents, not wealthy corporate developers and those who sympathize with them. That's my time. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone wanting to ask you questions, so thank you for coming out today. Next up, we have Ursula Mellons, followed by Noel Pereira.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to confirm, I thought Greg Winters was ahead of me, but he's not going to be speaking.
Well, you've been paying attention. He's not. He just was in touch with Ms.
Okay.
Duffany and myself.
Okay, I apologize. There we go. I'll be brief this afternoon, Madam Chair. So this written submission was provided to the city a little bit late Friday, but it was still provided. I'm making submissions now on behalf of Metcalf Realty Company, and they own the lands that are indicated on the plan that's currently before you. So these are lands that are between the current Canada North community that was brought in as part of the last urban expansion and March Valley Road. Coincidentally, they are adjacent to the Connaught Range. We did not know prior to today that DND was going to be speaking to this exact matter, as a matter of fact. Metcalf takes exception with the fact that these lands, or all of the lands on the March Valley Road, were not considered for future expansion as part of the report for the reasons that follow. It's not appropriate to categorically exclude them from consideration merely because of the presence of Connaught Range. There are many efficiencies, infrastructure, transit, servicing that can be easily extended to these lands, either through the existing Canada North area or up March Valley Road. They're in very close proximity to jobs and retail, as Mr. Chown referenced earlier. This area, it makes sense, and that it, at a certain point, logic, rational urban boundaries should be what's considered. Reference was made earlier to the 2012 OMB decision that spoke to the urban boundary as part of OPA 76. There was a pronouncement in regards to a buffer or a protection from the Connaught Range noise and what's generated thereon. However, just because that was said at that point in time does not categorically make it apply today, and that it would be more prudent to do updated studies or even considerations in regards to land uses. So accordingly, at this point in time, Metcalf is seeking that their lands be considered and scored for inclusion in the urban area, whether it be as Category 1 or Category 2 lands, because it's what makes efficient use of infrastructure and services. Those are my submissions.
Thank you, Ursula. I have a question for you myself, and it has to do with the proximity to the DND lands. You have a lot of experience for sure with proximity to the airport lands, and recently you were successful with the Salvation Army church.
March Road shelter, or sorry.
Yes,
Montreal
exactly.
Road. Yep.
No, I'm talking about the noise,
Yeah.
the airport, you forget, RCMP lands, but near the airport corridor. Are there such stipulations through federal government or whatever, such as the ones for noise for the airport, the cones that have been developed? Is there that for Department of Natural Defense lands? Or is that more of a, we're telling you we're still going to be very active in that, at Shirley's Bay and at Connaught Range?
Honestly, Madam Chair, I mean, I'd have to look into that specifically. I have not done so prior to today.
Well, then if you don't know that, then I'm very surprised. And so I would like somebody to find that out, because I think that that's, relevant. Maybe, not for this time round, but maybe for the next time round. Chair El Shantiri has a question.
Ursula, we don't want to see like we're gaining on you, but I live in that area. I'm pretty sure I drive that almost twice, 3 times a day in a normal time, not in a COVID time. And yet in the last number of years, I haven't heard any activities when it comes to the range. Would you be able to give us separate email? When is the last time an explosion was discharged on that property? Would that be?
No, she wouldn't know
available?
that.
Or would that be available? Because this is a
No.
public information, because if they discharge something.
She's not here
No, no, I know,
representing
but
them,
I
though?
forgot to ask her earlier, so
Yeah,
I
but
just want to know.
She won't know, though. She wasn't the one presenting. It was actually somebody from D&D.
Yeah, that was D&D. But if I could just respond, Madam Chair, through you, that's actually the point of our submission, is that I'm also the administrator for the Canada North area and involved in the development of that land. And it's just the categorical exclusion of these lands, which is effectively sterilizing them for the benefit of D&D without actual study or justification being provided. And it's not in the city's interest, because this is a rational location for development to occur.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And I don't see any other questions. So our next speaker is Noel
Pereira.
Thank you.
Pereira. Hello, Noel.
Hello, Madam Chair. May I please, before I start my presentation, ask whether you can hear me?
All right, yes, we can.
Awesome. The Joint Chairs, Council members, and all city staff, thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation. My name is Noel Pereira, and for the past 17 years, I have been the owner of the 55-year-old Cedar Hill Golf and Country Club located at 56 Cedar Hill Drive on the west side of Cedar View Road. I also own the Phase 1 lands of the Onasa subdivision south of Lytle Avenue and also located on the west side of Cedar View Road. The 86-acre golf course lands are located within the Cedar Hill Estates residential subdivision and north of the contiguous Orchard Estate subdivision. Both these subdivisions are approximately 1 acre estate lots on split services with municipal water. The Cedar Hill Golf Course and the abutting Orchard Estates and Cedar Hill and Orchard Estates communities are all designated general rural area on Schedule A Rural Policy Plan of the current City of Ottawa official plan. The designation permits a variety of rural land uses, including large lot residential dwellings. The golf course is no longer financially viable, given the changes to the golf industry. It has been money losing steadily every year. I had previously requested the golf course lands and Mount Asa Springs subdivision lands be considered for urban expansion by the city's planning committee. While planning applications to redevelop the lands to a large lot residential subdivision comparable to the abutting Cedar Hill Estates community would be reasonable and appropriate, I'm advised that it would not be best use of the lands given the close proximity to the current urban boundary located across the road on the east side of Cedar View Road. I retained various consultants to assess the appropriateness of the lands for urban expansion and believe they are a strong candidate for the city's urban boundary expansion. I have been advised that the new municipal services, potable water, sanitary and storm sewers, are now located in close proximity to my lands, mainly as a result of other development applications facilitating the consideration for urban lands. I am advised that there are no environmental constraints identified on these lands. The lands are well serviced by roads and provide opportunities for future transit services. The property is adjacent to an arterial road and is in proximity to existing and planned cycling spine routes along with multi-use pathways. While the lands are not currently well served by existing transit service, the lands are within close proximity to large employment and retail areas. They are connected by way of Cedar View Road, which is a north-south arterial road, and other major roadways and a highway interchange. Major employment facilities will develop on DCR Phoenix lands at Fellowfield Road and Strand Drive, and City Gate, the 170-acre master plan business park, incorporating a regional shopping center, Costco food store, and a corporate campus with a 251 square meter office assembly line distribution. I think it's the Amazon distribution center. With respect to staff report before both committees, The report identifies 1,011 hectares within Category 1 lands, noting that an additional 270 hectares is required to achieve the total land needed to accommodate the city's future growth. My lands identified as Category 2 lands and have not been recommended for inclusion within the 1,011 hectares. The report notes that one of the considerations for exclusion was the interface with the abutting subdivisions. However, the lands are of sufficient size and configuration with existing unopened road allowances to allow for an appropriate transition, integration, and connectivity to the adjacent Seedale and Orchard Estates country lot subdivisions. The report proposes 3 options for finding the additional 270 hectares prior to 2026. My request to the committee is that the committee direct staff that the Category 2 lands be added now, in particular, both Cedar Hill Golf lands and Onassa Springs lands, be added to the urban boundary to ensure the long-term visioning and planning know that exactly where the city will grow. I believe there's
You're
no...
out of time, Noel. Can you please wrap it up?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I don't see any question for you, sir. Thank you very much for being here today. Our next speaker is Mikael Mikalski. Michael?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right? Good. My comments are going to be very different, I think, from most of what you've heard. First, thank you, co-chairs and members of the committee, for this opportunity to speak to you. I'm not going to propose, support, or oppose any specific recommendation. I'm coming to the discussion after spending many years at Statistics Canada and quite a few years as a professor of epidemiology. I'm very concerned about the assumption that city staff have made in their projections that the pandemic is going to end sometime pretty soon and everything is going to return to the status quo ante. I think that's not very likely, but at the very least, it seems to me that it would be prudent to have a watching brief, in particular about the extent to which office space ends up being reoccupied at the same amount or extent as it has been prior to last year, prior to the pandemic. If there is a significant, and it doesn't have to be 100%, if it's even 20% reduction in the number of people occupying office space, that means that there would be a corresponding amount of space that could be converted to condos or apartments. So I wonder whether the demographic projections that staff have made are going to hold up. So my main suggestion is that is basically to wait. Don't approve anything this year until that is irreversible. That means shovels go into the ground and you can't reverse the decision. You can keep a watching brief. I don't think there's that much pressure to get shovels into the ground and start building things in the next 12 months. And continuing on that, I would also observe, as I observed to this committee back in May, that the demographic projections that staff did were interesting, but they were nowhere near as complete as I would have liked. And finally, if I have another minute, I can't resist responding a little bit to Ian Lee's comments before about 15-minute communities. We don't have 15-minute communities in many parts of Ottawa right now because the way the development was allowed to occur was completely antithetical to that. So the idea is not 15-minute communities overlaid on existing built structure. We have to, and I'm sure you guys appreciate it better than I do, that the built environment evolves rather slowly. But the idea should be to put in place measures and regulations and strictures or whatever that make the future growth of the city much more supportive of the emergence of 15-minute communities. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. That was really interesting. And you're right, it was a different perspective. I don't see any questions for you, however. So thanks again for coming out and sticking through all those speakers. The next up, we have 2 speakers left. The next one is Milan Fe, or Fate, or Milan. You're going to have to tell me.
Hasn't signed on.
Hasn't signed on. So we'll go to potentially our last speaker, who is Phil Mount, the Associate Director of Just Food. Is Phil here?
I'm not seeing him. Give me 1 second. No,
Everybody's holding their breath.
not there.
Okay, so what can we say? That's good. So the joint committee is in recess until noon tomorrow. We'll see you back then. And we'll be up first with all the motions. We'll go down first, be put down. Staff will be here, staff from transportation, staff from PED, of course. I'm sure they've covered the gambit of what we're going to ask about tomorrow. So have a good rest and see you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.